The story begins in one unusual city, where a big celebration was about to begin. This year the festival was supposed to be much brighter than in previous years because this year was wonderful. Each of the families wanted to stand out in order to receive the dragon's blessing. The people also said that the dragon deity in their village was so powerful that people from other villages came to pray to it. And their king was truly generous, because he sacrificed a lot of animals, because thanks to the mercy of the dragon, a lot of piglets were born this year. Suddenly, the cakes from the table began to fall in an instant, which were lying not far from the pig. This turn of events greatly confused the two men, because they did not understand why this happened. The frightened men even thought that a pig could have done this, but this was impossible because it was already cooked. Fearing God's punishment, the men looked around and felt that something was wrong here. Even the birds began to fly away from the village, as if they sensed some kind of danger. The stunned man immediately noticed this, and what he saw began to frighten him even more. Several dozen stones instantly began to fall from the giant mountain, and this was indeed a very bad sign for the residents. The ground on which the festival was taking place gradually began to crumble, and the rock gradually collapsed, creating a danger to life with every second. It turned out that there was an earthquake, and all the people who were at the festival needed to be saved. Due to the strong earthquake, rockfall began to occur and the giant mountain gradually collapsed, forcing people to flee. The destruction became stronger every second, and a huge number of cobblestones seemed to explode from an earthquake. Suddenly, someone began to emerge from the fog that was formed as a result of the rockfall. The girl was unknown, and no one could understand how she survived what happened on this mountain. The girl who came was very hungry and wanted to find out where the dragon cook was. Looking down, she saw many varieties of food that were left over from the festival. On the floor there were many varieties of foods that were prepared to be offered to the gods. But the unknown girl did not like the taste of this food at all, because it was disgusting. Angry at this turn of events, the girl shouted that no matter where the dragon cook was hiding, she would still find him. Due to the fact that she was extremely angry, she also exclaimed that either he would come to her, or she would kill the dragon cook. At that very second, experiencing great fear, the young man exclaimed that he was not the dragon's cook. It turned out that it was a dream of a young guy who horrified him with its plot. Some time later, events continued to occur in the region of Sichuan, which was an extraordinary place. This region was famous not only for its marvelous views and abundance of food, but also because this place is a unique treasury of Chinese gastronomy. One of the restaurants made wonderful dishes that were famous for their taste and unusual presentation. An experienced chef, we prepared fried pieces of chicken with red pepper for the third table and a special flour salad. Fried chicken pieces with red pepper, soft fresh. This dish is very popular in their Sichuan cuisine. And the autumn flower salad is a secret recipe of the Mo family, and is famous for its exquisite shape and genuine crunch. The dishes were truly gorgeous, which is why the head chef was constantly praised by the guests who tried them. Meanwhile, one of the guys was playing a game on his smartphone in the kitchen and didn't even think about cooking. The waitress decided to approach the young master and tell him that the dish for the third table was ready, after which she decided to clarify whether it was necessary to serve them now. Realizing that the guy was very busy, the alarmed waitress began to leave, realizing that she would not wait for an answer. Suddenly, the guy put down his phone and asked to bring an autumn flower here to look at this dish. From such a check, all the chefs were very excited, and the Lord found out who made this salad. Feeling very stressed, the chef exclaimed that he was the one who made the salad, after which he asked if there were any questions for him. Shredded radish, chopped easily and quickly, when placed on a plate, resembles an autumn chrysanthemum, hence the name of the dish. The conditions for this dish are also thinness, transparency, and softness. Then the hero decided to ask the chef named Zhang Shibua if it seemed to him that this radish was thick and uneven, which could not be called a flower petal. This dish needed to be remade, and the chef needed to train his knife skills for about an hour tomorrow for such an oversight. Not understanding anything, Zhang Shibua was furious because he could not believe these words. Anger overcame him, and he could not believe that he could not cook this wonderful dish, from which he began to shout in anger that this is nonsense, and the radish cannot be thick and uneven. This guy only does what he commands, which is why the boss wanted to see this guy's skill in practice. The other chefs even started holding the chef, because he wanted to attack the guy who dared to challenge his dish. Following this, Zhang Shibua exclaimed that the hero is a loser who simply does not give the chefs the opportunity to cook. After which, the experienced chief threw his hat as a sign that he did not respect this man. Turning around, the man also said that he thought that working in Mo's establishment with 100 years of glory would be great, and then he let the boy tell him how to cook, and Zhang Shibua was not going to tolerate it anymore. Suddenly, the boy ordered the boss to stop, because he had not yet finished talking to him. The young man decided to say that he really is a failure, but the Mo family strives for excellence in cooking. As a chef, he does not respect his own food and is inappropriate to the opinions of other people. It is precisely because of this that Zhang Shibua does not deserve to be a chef. The elderly man did not understand how he could not deserve this because of the words of a loser, when suddenly, someone behind him turned up and asked what would happen if these were his words. But it turned out that it was Mo Hong's grandfather, the current head of Mo's home cooking restaurant, the president of the Sichuan Cuisine Association, and no one could understand what he was doing here. The old man actually heard their argument, and wanted to be allowed to say something like that. The cooks were very afraid of the owner of this establishment, because they understood that this was a very bad sign for Zhang Shibua. Mo Hong decided to explain that maybe they were right, that Mo is a little picky, but that is not the main problem. Mo's company's reputation is based on perfection. He does what no one else can do, the ideal of cooking. After which, the owner of the establishment decided to ask Zhang Shibua whether he prepares well, and whether he really pays attention to every knife, every spatula he uses. Realizing that he was in a hopeless situation, the cook fell to his knees and began to beg to be allowed to work in this establishment. But the old man was merciless, and asked him to do him a favor and stop trying to be part of the great. Starting to cry, Zhang Shibua continued to shout that he was wrong and begged Mr. Mo Hong to forgive him. Some time later, the grandfather and his grandson were having lunch, and the elderly man turned to Ting, saying that he had been having a hard time lately and should take care of himself. The boy didn't even understand what his grandfather was talking about, because he is the 28th generation of the Mo family, and must work here at full capacity. The seasoned chef said his talent for understanding the culinary arts deserves this title. But there was one nuance that the grandfather still wanted to tell his grandson about. The joyful boy interrupted him, and I turned to my grandfather and said that he might have problems with his hands, but he was not at all hopeless. That's why I decided to show my true skills, because I wanted to prove my real strength. Raising his leg, he picked up a kettle of boiling water with it in order to show an unusual trick. The brave guy instantly threw a kettle of boiling water straight into the air using his foot. From the force of the throw, the kettle began to spin incredibly hard, but not a drop of boiling water poured out of it. At the moment when the kettle was spinning, the guy was easily able to put it right on his leg. This sight really surprised Mo Hong, because he knew that this child was incredible. The elder even began to cry because he realized that Ting was persistent and trying very hard. As if nothing had happened, the boy exclaimed that everything was fine with him and he was ready to continue working. Suddenly the cook started running, shouting that he was afraid that all was not well. After all, someone had formed a crowd outside, and a large number of people had gathered right outside the restaurant, causing even Ting to drop the kettle. The young guy was shocked because he wanted to understand who really wanted to make a fuss. Meanwhile, a luxury car with unknown people drove up to the restaurant building. The people who stood outside the restaurant did not understand that strangers were being made, because the Mo family is very pious and cannot have conflicts. At the same time, strangers saw the sign, and even it was broken, which is why they thought it was too serious a violation. Unknown people continued to watch the sign, drawing conclusions about this establishment. The young guy decided to ask his colleague if this was really the restaurant, because it looked like an old rundown diner, and it looked like a disappointment. The elderly man exclaimed that this was indeed the place where they had been heading for such a long time. Tears even began to appear in his eyes, because he realized that not even 100 years had passed since the last time he visited here. After which, the unknown man said that it was time for the Mo family to pay a huge price for what happened back then. Suddenly, Ting began to leave the restaurant and ask the villains what kind of mess they had created here. Feeling strong anger and rage, the hero looked at the strangers and immediately realized that it was them. The scoundrels who arrived also realized that this guy was the heir to the Mo family. The insolent people who dared to come here stood on the sign where the name of the restaurant was written and trampled on it. This phenomenon really shocked the guy, because he couldn't even imagine that someone would have such impudence and come here doing such things. Instantly this caused genuine rage in him, and he wanted to take revenge for such an impudent act. Feeling a desire to take revenge, he began to act, and, starting to quickly run, rushed at one of the villains. The main character literally wished death to the one who dared to come here, and hit him with all his might. But it turned out that the stranger was very dexterous and easily dodged such a powerful blow. Ting shouted to the scoundrels so that they don't think that the Mo family will be scared of them so easily, and no one will leave here today with impunity. Unexpectedly, someone began to clap their hands, saying that the Mo family was truly great. The owner of the establishment also came up and said that this was truly impressive aristocracy. After all, the Mo family always believed that they were helping others, but now they have broken their sign and are trampling on it. The disgruntled people behind the strangers were shouting for Tin to kill these scoundrels because they deserved to die and no one would allow them to hurt good people. All this time, the strangers stood in one place and listened to the restaurant owners and the crowd that stood behind them. One of the strangers was very amused by the phrase that the Mo family are kind people. The elderly man literally started screaming with laughter, because he understood that this was really not the case. After which, he instantly became serious and turned to Mr. Mo Hong to ask if he remembered the Huang family in the south of the city. Although it was 100 years ago, they have the right to trample on this sign. Hearing this, the old man tensed a little and asked if this really happened in the south of the city. Immediately after this, he felt genuine terror and fear began to appear in his eyes. Either way, the main character didn't care who they were, but if they didn't have a better explanation, then they better get out of here. Unexpectedly, Mo Hong yelled at Ting, telling him to shut up, and immediately after that, he walked closer to the guests, saying that they were their respected guests of the Mo family, and they would be polite to them. For the hero, this was a truly amazing turn of events, because grandfather had never behaved like this before. One of the descendants of the Huang family asked the young guy if he knew the history of their families. After all, 100 years ago the city had two leading cuisines that were very popular. For their outstanding abilities they were awarded royal gold. In fact, to the north of the city lived the Mo family, and his ancestors, the Huang family. To the south of the city, their families were friends, if not for these empty and pompous titles. But it was precisely because of these titles that the fratricidal war began. In the end the Mo family won, and his ancestors, the Huang family, left the country with a humiliating defeat. All these 100 years they did not return to their homeland. Although it was today that the descendant of the Huang family came here to fulfill the promise made to their ancestors to challenge the Mo family and regain glory. Addressing people, the man also said that what the Huang family did today carries a more serious meaning than it seems at first glance. People immediately reacted to this and realized that there was really nothing wrong with it, because the Huang family suffered from the Mo family. It turned out that Tin had heard this story for the first time, and was shocked by this turn of events. But it was true, and although Mo Hong didn't want to admit it, it was true. The surprised residents of the city saw that Mo Hong had aged very much and looked depressing, but everyone also understood that both families had suffered in this situation. Anyway, everyone understood that these guys were in trouble, and this old man is the president of the Sichuan Cuisine Association. At the same time, the gazes of the two family representatives met each other, and closely watched every action. Immediately after this, Mo Hong introduced himself, saying that he was the 27th generation of the Mo family, and greeted the new guests as old friends of their family. The worried elder wanted his family to make concessions to the Huang family. This alarmed the young man even more because he could not believe the words of his grandfather. The old man also exclaimed that he accepted the Huang family's challenge. In accordance with the promise of his ancestors, they would settle the feud in a culinary duel. And then they decided to ask the Huang family when they would be ready to fight. Laughing, the man was truly impressed by his nobility, and as for the time, he decided to think about it. After a moment, he reached out to the tablecloth that was lying on the table. Taking off the tablecloth, the man exclaimed that he wanted to start right away. Under the tablecloth there were a lot of food and cutlery, because he wanted to compete in the culinary arts right now. For the Mo family, This was truly an impressive turn of events. After all, they did not even expect that there would be such a battle on this day. It seemed that the elder was ready for this fight and would do everything possible to win. The spectators were shocked and thought that the Huang family looked like they had already won and had prepared well. Rolling up the sleeves of his shirt, Mo Hong also noticed that the Huang family had prepared well for this battle. Turning to look at his grandfather, the young man noticed that his body was very strong, but the experienced cook exclaimed that everything was in order, and grandfather still had the strength to cook. Mr. Huang asked to take his time and first agree on the terms and punishment for the losers. After all, not only will they have to abandon their ancestral home, but they will also lose the title of victors in that conflict and give up the title of the best in the world. But also, the entire Mo family must kneel if they lose. This request really made Ting laugh a lot, because every year 8 out of 10 of his grandfather's chefs fail, and Mr. Huang will lose to his grandfather as many times as he wants. Brave Mo Hong accepted the challenge and was ready to fight for his honor and dignity. As expected from respected Mo, this time the representative of the Huang family in the cooking competition will not be Mr. Huang, and his son, named Huang Tian, who had been preparing for the competition for many years and was ready to win. His son is in charge of the kitchen in the Huang family, and has a high level of culinary skills, and after he returned to his homeland, Huang Tian received the highest qualification as a chef. Because of this, Mr. wants the heirs of the Huang and Mo families to compete in a culinary duel. This turn of events was unexpected for Mo Hong, because he understood that he was definitely not ready for this. The main character was also amazed that he would have to act as an opponent for the Huang family. His hands were shaking with fear, because he was not ready for such a serious battle. Remembering his childhood, the doctors at the hospital diagnosed that this child had a very rare case of pathology of the forearm skeleton. Compared to normal people, he will not be able to perform fine movements and has much less strength. And this disease was not curable, although he was the only heir to the culinary art of the Mo family, but modern medicine was not able to cope with this task, and the culinary art was impossible for him. Meanwhile, Huang Tian decided to turn to brother Ting, saying that even though he doesn't know how to fight, but when he prepares, he has never lost to anyone, absolutely no one. As soon as the apple that was cut by Huang Tian was placed on the table, something very impressive was about to happen. Namely, the apple, which was expertly cut, fell into many small particles, as if it had been cut thousands of times to get a beautiful flower. It was a really skillful gesture for everyone because not everyone could replicate something like that. People in the crowd understood that the apple instantly turned into a flower, and this was very beautiful, because this was the greatest skill of the Huang family. Mastering the blade at such a young age was impressive. At the same time, the hero thought that it was such a shame to trample on the name of his family, because no one had ever seen Mo Ting's culinary abilities before. Huang Tian, watching everything that was happening, wanted to ask if the Mo family really didn't even have the courage to fight. Not knowing what to say, Tin tried to answer this question, but could not utter a word. Suddenly, Grandpa exclaimed that the Mo family was making a decision in this situation. After bowing, he decided that the Mo family would give up in this situation. The hero was shocked by such an act on the part of his grandfather, because he had never seen him give up without a fight before. The people watching realized that the Mo family had given up without a fight, and their 100-year glory was over. Now they would find shame and be forced to kneel. Even for the Huang family, this was very strange because they did not expect that the heir would not be able to fight. Huang Tian also couldn't believe it, because he didn't think that he could win without a fight. The elder reiterated that they would admit defeat and also apologize to them, as agreed. The grandson continued to stop his grandfather, saying that he did not need to do this. Continuing to mock, Huang Tian laughed and asked why Ting didn't even dare to have a cooking duel, as if he had no conscience. Realizing his defeat, grandfather knew that they must keep their promises. Although it was unfortunate to realize, Mo Hong had to do what he promised. His legs were trembling, and he felt great fear, because he understood that his reputation was over. The people were also alarmed by such a sight, and could not believe that the elder would actually kneel before them. The poor old man had not found himself a worthy heir, and everyone understood that now the Mo family had truly lost. Suddenly, Mo Ting exclaimed that he was the 28th generation of the family, and he is not as skilled as his grandfather Mo Hong. Still, the guy decided to kneel, as he promised. For the Huang family, this was a joyful sight, because they wanted to see the Mo family so badly that they lost. The sight was indeed pleasant even for Huang Tian, although it was unexpected. Turning around and looking at his grandson, the grandfather was shocked by what he saw. Because the 28th representative of the Mo family, Ting, admitted defeat, but he, Mo Ting, swears that he will personally erase the shame of the Mo family. Looking straight into the eyes of his opponent, the hero exclaimed that he would erase this shame when necessary, and he will take revenge for what they did by destroying the honor and dignity of the Mo family. Some time later, events continued to occur in Megapolis. On one of the roofs of a huge building stood a girl who appeared as a result of the earthquake. Smiling, she realized that she had finally smelled the dragon cook, and she immediately jumped from the huge building in order to find him. Meanwhile, grandfather and grandson were eating, and Mo Hong was glad that even though he hadn't cooked for a long time, he was still doing great. The food was really impressive and looked delicious. The old man asked his grandson to eat while the food was still hot, because after this he won't try grandpa's food again. At the same time, the hero was not himself, and felt simply disgusting. He was overcome with rage because he could not tolerate such behavior on the part of the scoundrels who dared to invade their lives. Suddenly, he hit the table with all his strength, as a sign that he could no longer stand it, and he shouted that he and his grandfather couldn't just put up with these upstarts from the Huang family. The grandson really couldn't believe that his grandfather had just been kicked out of the culinary world. At this point, the elderly man didn't even know what to answer, and just looked at the food he had prepared. But after that, he put down the wooden chopsticks and wanted to say something. Smiling, he turned to Tin, saying that his grandfather lived his life without any regrets, and he is incredibly happy that he is already over 80, and he can still cook a delicious dish, and he is happy, so he can come to terms with something like that. Feeling guilty, the hero exclaimed that if not for him, everything could have been different. The grandfather understood that in any case he could not blame his grandson for this, because it was not his fault. Mo Hong also forced someone to find information about that boy. Even if grandpa wasn't old and weak, he couldn't defeat him. Typically, when people of their family retire, they must pass it on to the next generation, so the grandfather passed a certain box to his grandson. This box was really unusual, and the guy really wanted to know what was inside. Having opened it, the guy was truly amazed to see what was there. To his surprise, it was an unknown artifact that was in the box. Laughing, grandfather explained that it was a family heirloom, and it was said that their ancestor was a farmer who became a famous master cook just a few years after he got this thing. After he became the royal chef, they received their plaque. The ancestors claimed that this thing had magical powers, but while it was passed down from generation to generation, there was no evidence of this. Their rules also state that when the previous generation retires, the item is passed on to the next generation, so it should be kept. This heirloom really impressed the main character. Suddenly, he had a very strange feeling, as if he was not worthy of this. Squeezing the medallion tightly until it hurt in his hands, he shouted that he had no right to own it. Feeling very angry, he hit the table with all his strength, and shouted that he could not wield it because his hands were useless. Having thrown the medallion, the guy began to leave, because he understood that he was very ashamed, and he needed to correct this situation in any way. After which, he immediately closed the door, leaving grandfather alone in the room. For the elderly man, this reaction caused an incredible shock, because he did not expect his grandson to behave this way. With regret, the grandfather understood that his grandson would not just leave it like that, and would see the matter through to the end. In fact, it is not for nothing that this medallion is a family treasure, because it was not for nothing that it was passed down from generation to every person, after which he became a great cook. This kind of medallion has magical powers, which the main character will soon learn about. Some time later, in one of the restaurants, someone was screaming and begging to catch the thief. The cooks were chasing an unknown girl who had entered the kitchen and was trying to steal food. It turned out that this was the same girl who was reborn and arose as a result of the earthquake. The angry cooks could not find the thief, and did not understand where the girl had hidden. For them it was really disgraceful, because the robbery took place in the middle of the day. This girl robbed a dozen tables, and even took away the head of a pig. Some time later, events continued to occur on one of the roofs of the old houses. That same girl stood on the roof and did something very interesting. Around her lay a large amount of food that she had successfully stolen from the restaurant. In fact, she ate all this food that she had so diligently robbed. And in one bite she could even eat a pig's head, although she understood that it was impossible to eat all this. Then she asked the fourth brother why there were so many people here, because if she didn't find the dragon cook, these scoundrels would simply beat her to death. Patting the wooden dragon, she also asked her brothers not to just stand there and also help her search. Suddenly, the girl had a very strange feeling, as if someone with magical abilities was not far from her. She really smelled that dangerous blade had been activated and the dragon cook had returned. He was on Earth. Thanking her brothers, she began to run to that same dragon cook so that he could finally feed her. Some time later, events continued at Tina's house. Lying on the bed, he knew that this knife was their family's legacy, and also a sign of hope, so he must accept it. After all, he is the only heir of the Mo family and must definitely continue the family line. Suddenly, someone came through the window, and was incredibly fast. Suddenly getting out of bed, the guy discovered that someone had entered his room. He realized that perhaps it was a burglar, and anyone might want to covet their house. For his own safety, he began reaching for a baseball bat to protect himself and his home. Meanwhile, that same unknown girl was already sitting in the kitchen of the house, eating all the food that was on the table. With great pleasure, the girl ate everything that came to her hand, and wanted as much food as possible. This food, in her opinion, was really excellent. Then she realized that this is the generation of dragon cooks, and it cooks well, and after such a day she definitely needs to sleep. The tired girl lay down on the bed and exclaimed that she would sleep, after which she would take him tomorrow, as well as the gold coins. This behavior angered Tin extremely. He understood that it was disrespectful, and the thief was also going to sleep here. Swinging at the thief, he decided to take revenge on her for unceremoniously breaking into his house. He swung the baseball bat with all his strength and was about to hit the stranger right on the head. Immediately after this, a terrible scream was heard, and the guy realized that it was a girl. The concerned grandfather also entered the room and turned on the light to understand what was happening here. This situation really caused a shock, because it was not known who the girl was and how she was able to get into the house. The stranger now had a very bad headache, because the blow was extremely strong. The stunned guy immediately began to apologize, saying that he did not want to hit the girl. Angry, the girl's eyes changed color, and she seemed to say in a voice that was not her own that he dared to hit her, because of which he had to say goodbye with his life. Instantly, her hand turned into a claw with huge claws, which immediately began to attack. This ability caused concern to the main character, and he was simply furious with what he had just seen. As soon as the stranger grabbed the main character, the same medallion immediately began to be visible from under his t-shirt. This was immediately noticed by the girl who attacked. The main character realized that she saw his medallion, and immediately stopped. Her hand turned into a human one again, and the stranger began to examine the medallion very carefully. Approaching a little closer to Tin, she also decided to smell him to understand whether he was a friend or an enemy. Suddenly, her mood improved dramatically, after which she shouted that she had finally found the dragon cook. Using her magical abilities, she decided to act. Taking the hero by the hand, the strange stranger wanted him to go with her. Suddenly, she began to drag him somewhere, as if into a portal through which they teleported. And this was really so, because in just a few seconds they were able to teleport to a completely different place. The worried grandfather did not understand what was happening here, and wanted to help his grandson, but did not know how. A hand also began to emerge from the portal, as if reaching for something. It turned out that it was the hand of the same stranger who was trying to reach for food. Carrying a plate of chicken with her, at the end she said that work should not be wasted, and it is necessary to eat this delicious food. Immediately after this, the portal closed, and no one else could get into it. All that was left was the bat on the floor, which indicated that something strange had happened here, and even the bat was bent from the force of the blow. Worried, Mo Hong couldn't understand what happened here or who this girl was. Not understanding what was happening, the main character continued his teleportation, and was afraid of what happened to him. The bright light hit him directly in the eyes, and he tried to cover his face with his hands so as not to go blind. But when he opened his eyes, he saw an unknown world in front of him, and did not understand what that same girl had dragged him into. The place was truly amazing, because the guy couldn't even imagine something like this before. Suddenly, he realized that things were bad for him, because he began a free fall, but unfortunately he could not fly. Closing his eyes, he began to think that he was going to die, because he continued to fall, and with every second he was getting lower. At that same second, the girl asked him to whom he was telling all this. After all, even if he were a ghost, he wouldn't do anything, and she's not really afraid of ghosts. Realizing that he was in an upright position, Ting began to panic and beg to be let go. Having asked who this girl was, she immediately replied that she was his ancestor. The guy was so angry that he couldn't believe it, and the words greatly offended his family, so he asked to let such a respected person like him go. The angry girl clearly did not like this statement, and she hit Tina right in the face with all her might. However, this guy was very difficult to find, and he needs to return before the gluttons from this world get him. Unexpectedly, the girl took the main character by the hood and began to pull him somewhere. From such a flight he could not breathe, because his throat was blocked due to the actions of the stranger. He literally started screaming, telling the girl to take it easy, otherwise he would die. Realizing that he had to get out of here, Ting shouted for his relative to let him go. Suddenly, he saw a monster that was not far from him, and probably no longer wanted to go down. The smart lady also said that she would let the boy go a little later, and they would fly on. As soon as she tried to let go of Ting, he literally grabbed onto her because he didn't want to go down. A fight broke out between them, because the boy understood that if they let him go, he would fly to be fed by an unknown creature. As soon as they landed on the ground, they found themselves in Tao's house. This place was truly amazing. The smart guy immediately realized that Tao is this middle child of the dragon who is a glutton. The girl did not like this statement very much, because she could not imagine that she would be called a glutton, because she is the goddess of food, and not a glutton. Experiencing severe pain from the click, the guy could not believe these words, because he did not think that Tao was in front of him now. At that very moment, she began to use magical abilities, and horns began to appear on her forehead, and she also turned to the revered dragon's provider. And raising her hand up, magical energy rushed through it, soon after which the girl said that the gates of Tao's house should open. The spectacle was truly impressive, and Ting could not believe his eyes again, because he found himself in a completely different world. This caused him to panic and feel that his life would soon come to an end. Smiling, Tao noticed that this guy really had a very stupid look, and also said that she was the 9th princess of the dragon family. She is in charge of the delicacies of the 3 worlds, and also owns the Tao Palace, and is the mistress of this place. Due to the fact that she is the 9th daughter, she must be called Josie, because she likes it better. Continuing to realize his fate in this event, the guy finally realized that dragons, fairies, and other creatures are here for a reason. Having taken out the contract, Josie immediately asked the hero to sign it as a sign of devotion. Still, the hero decided to ask, "Dear Josie, what was going on here?" But she didn't want to answer such questions, and shoved the contract right in the guy's face, saying that he urgently needed to sign it. Realizing that it was impossible to sign an unknown document, Ting still wanted to find out what was going on here in the end. Soon after, the girl began to explain that she, as the goddess of food, was in charge of the Linglang space in Tao's house, and was also in charge of delicious food among the beings of the 3 worlds. And the dragon's cook is the best cook on Earth. She slept on Earth for several years, but the last dragon's cook died, and these little people continued to cook all sorts of rubbish for her. Because of this, Josie decided to give the guy a rare chance that could change his life. This was really surprising, because Ting realized that the gods also need to eat, and this girl is the head of the divine canteen. But in fact, this is not even a dining room, because the gods will not eat simple cooking. The gods must enjoy the best food, so being a dragon's cook is a revered job in heaven. Over the years, Josie blackmailed her into acquiring many treasures, which she now has in her palace. After which, the girl instantly blushed and asked to forget about it, because she had made a mistake and it was not blackmail. But in any case, if the blade declared itself, then it must prepare well, and Josie agreed to such conditions, which is why she again asked to sign the contract. Meanwhile, the boy was thinking that it was his grandfather who prepared the food, and did not understand how he would explain all this to the crazy Josie. Having asked to stop, Tin began to reach out to the girl to explain everything to her. She, in turn, did not want to listen to anything, and asked him to be a man, because he behaved like a mumble. And grabbing his hand, she began to press on the contract to form an imprint on it. Thus, the contract was signed and an agreement was concluded between them. As soon as this happened, Ting exclaimed that it was not he who prepared those dishes. At the same time, Josie no longer heard him, because she was very happy that he had finally signed this contract. The magical contract began to glow with a very bright light. The glow was visible throughout the city. The contract also created a new building, which was erected in a matter of seconds. The sight was truly amazing and beautiful. It surprised Tina extremely. As soon as the building was built, it immediately began to disappear, as if the contract had been abruptly interrupted. This event surprised the couple even more, who did not even understand what was happening and why everything happened the way it did. The enraged girl wanted to find out from the damn boy what he did, because Tao's house had completely disappeared. Such statements already gave the boy a headache, and he could not answer this question because he did not know. Josie knew that when a dragon chef appeared, Tao's house would change depending on the characteristics and skills of the new chef, but this had never happened before. Getting even more angry, the goddess began to interrogate the hero, asking how well he could cook, and also ordered him not to dare lie to her. Again the guy repeated his answer, saying that it was not he who cooked this food, that they could barely, but his grandfather. Josie dragged him here, forced him to sign the contract, but did not even listen. Sighing heavily, the goddess realized that she had really made a mistake, because she had brought this guy here without even really talking to him. Suddenly, magical lighting began to appear in front of them again, and someone from afar said that the deed was done, and the dragon's cook had returned. Petrified with shame, Josie understood that now it would be the end for her, because the magic portal said that the dragon's cook had returned, and the 9th daughter should organize a feast. Many different voices said that they wanted to try the dishes that the dragon chef had to prepare. Not understanding what to do, Josie began to think that the only way out of this situation would be to kill Ting, because he was not capable of anything. Having come to her senses a little and overcoming her anger, she nevertheless decided to ask what dishes he could cook. The alarmed and excited guy could barely answer, saying that he had never cooked anything before. As Josie began to cry, she realized that it would die along with this fool, and they would die together. Meanwhile, some unknown creature began to fly towards them and screamed. The unknown creature literally began to cry, saying that Josie had finally returned, because they were delivered every day by these scoundrels. The guards at the Eastern Heaven Gate said that they would come to the feast, which is why the dragon cook was needed. Not understanding what kind of creature this was, the guy still wanted to find out who it was. It turns out that his name is Pa, and he is the master spirit of the Tao house, which is why they will meet often. The spirit immediately noticed the guy and thought that he was the dragon's cook, which made him very happy. After thinking a little, the guy said that according to this cruel girl, it seems that he is the dragon's cook. The joyful spirit was very happy, and understood that now Tao's house was finally saved, and wanted to find out if the newly arrived cook could cook well. But from the reaction of the people who surrounded him, the spirit understood that something was clearly wrong here. Some time later, the master spirit of the Josie house was shocked by the information he received, because he learned that the dragon cook did not know how to cook at all. Tin also admitted that he did not want to be a dragon cook at all, and could not do anything because the goddess dragged him here by force. Josie was immediately outraged by this accusation because he was wearing a dragon chef pendant, and she was not to blame for anything. Starting to scream, the spirit tried to calm the arguing people and asked them to think better about what to do in this situation. The frightened goddess began to think that the only thing left for them was death, because this guy couldn't cook anything at all. Looking at his hands, the hero asked how anyone could do anything sensible with them. Closely watching Tin's hands, the Uni wanted to find out what was wrong with them. After which, Josie decided to use her magical abilities to understand what the problem was. Looking at the hand, she determined that the tendons and veins were faulty. Then she realized that Tin was disabled. The guy had nothing to say and just continued to look at his hands, realizing that there was nothing he could do about it. Starting to think, the goddess suggested that one heavenly pill would be enough, but then she stopped talking about it, saying that it was better to forget it, and it was better to return the guy to Earth. otherwise these scoundrels would tear him to pieces if they didn't get good food. Suddenly, the boy exclaimed that they should wait. Approaching the girl, he decided to ask what she said about heavenly pills. Turning to the cook, the girl only repeated that she would send him back to the human world. Feeling very embarrassed, the boy still decided to ask what she was talking about a little earlier. Not knowing what he was talking about, Josie said that she said that his tendons and veins were faulty. Then the guy asked again what she said after that. Again, I don't understand what's going on. Josie remembered that she was talking about heavenly pills. Tin was really very happy, because he wanted to understand where such pills were sold that could heal him. Although it would be a piece of cake for Josie to get the heavenly pill, he had already caused her so much trouble that she was unsure whether to look for the pill for him. Using her magical abilities, the girl exclaimed for him to return to his world again, and she grabbed him by the clothes so that he wouldn't run away. Again Tin was not heard, and had to go to the human world. The worried guy understood that in this situation it was still necessary to talk, and there was no need to rush. Realizing that there was no other way out, Tin began to shout that he would help with the feast for the guards of the eastern heavenly gates. Immediately after this, Josie calmed down and released the alarmed boy. Smiling at him, she asked if the dragon's cook would really help in this difficult matter. Fearing the consequences, Tin confirmed that he would indeed help. Some time later, events continued to occur near Taot's new house, which looked like a diner. Such a sight was truly unpleasant, because Taot's former house was incredibly beautiful. Beginning to get very worried, the hero asked if it was good that the house now looked like this. But the spirit also didn't like it, because he believed that it was Ting's fault, because Taot's house and the dragon cook are one. As good as the dragon cook's food is, Taot's house is as great. Even the goddess to the limit of the boy, that if he does not cope with this task, then she will beat him. Smart Tin said that he would never cook them in his world, but in his world he never had problems with traditional cuisine. Looking at this skinny guy, the girl couldn't believe his words, because with his hands it's not really believable. Looking at his hands again, the hero exclaimed that he knew many dishes that could be prepared without using his hands. Entering Taot's house, the spirit wanted to give him a tour, but the guy understood that it was just a small stall, and there was no point in the tour. Pointing to the cabinet, the spirit explained that Taot's house is a unique artifact of the three worlds, and the treasure is located right inside this cabinet. Assuming that this was an ordinary locker, Tin began to reach for it in order to open it and see what was there. As soon as the cabinet was opened, strange smoke immediately began to fly out of it. This smoke literally filled the entire room, and did not allow the hero to open his eyes. But as soon as he did this, he saw something very surprising, because now the guy is in the royal garden, where all kinds of birds and animals from the three worlds live. The spectacle was truly amazing, because the garden turned out to be of incredible proportions. But for the spirit this was nonsense, because the last royal garden was 1,000 times larger. Next was the garden of 1,000 herbs, the plants in it grew in the heavens themselves. Also, nearby was the yin and yang space. If the dragon chef cooked one dish here, it could reproduce it countless times. In another room was a warehouse of storage vessels that had an incredibly cool smell. Looking at Tin, the spirit also decided to explain that only the dragon's cook can take advantage of all this, and one cannot rely on them. As soon as they try to apply their strength to the process, the food will turn out tasteless. Looking at each other, they realized that they needed to start cooking. After all, at the moment, the honor of the dragon chef depends on Mo Ting. Used a magic spell, the spirit began to move the main character to the starting point, namely, to Taot's house, where they used to be. This house is now officially his home, and since he said that he can cook without his hands, Josie would like to see him boast. Remembering all kinds of recipes, the hero began to think about what to cook for him. At that very second, an idea came to his mind that he wanted to bring to life. And right away I said that he knows what to do and how to cook. Some time later, events continued to occur during a battle with a huge rooster, which could release flames from its mouth. The hero tried with all his might to run away from this rooster, because he did not expect it to be so gigantic in size. This only amused Josie and the spirit, because the cook avoids his own ingredient from the dish. The rooster was truly impressive in size, and very similar to a monster from some movie. Tin began to run away from the huge rooster through the forest, because he was afraid that he would never be able to cook it. The main character's team clearly did not want to help him, because they believed that the ingredients were the same as the cook. In fact, it was an ordinary fire chicken. All generations of dragon chefs with a knife in their hand could get their hands on any ingredient, and it would be a great shame for the past generations if they saw Ting. The angry guy exclaimed that if he didn't succeed, he would simply get hit on the head, but Josie would be in trouble. The girls obviously didn't like this kind of threat, because only he can work here, and they can't help him. This was true, but the smart guy understood that he would cook, but the girl could help him kill the bird. As it turns out, this really isn't a problem because the dragon chefs have many servants to help with the ingredients, the spirit explained. Getting even more angry, the goddess shouted that no one dare force her to help in such a matter. But there was no time to hesitate, because the rooster was already very close and was ready to attack. Fortunately, with just one spell, Josie was able to easily deal with such a giant beast. As soon as a single spell was cast, the goddess took the life of the giant rooster. The smart boy was happy that he had such an assistant as Josie. After thinking a little, Ting asked the spirit to prepare these spices for him, and Josie should help him with something else, namely, dig up some dirt. The goddess clearly did not like such a request, because she could not even imagine that she would have to dig the ground. Turning to the girl, the hero assumed that she had not heard, and again asked her to dig up the dirt, the same dirt that everyone played with in childhood. Feeling very angry, Josie exclaimed that no one dared to force her to dig dirt, and Ting clearly did not like her life. Continuing to make excuses, the hero explained that his hands are not capable of doing such work, that's why he asks for help, and the spirit began to persuade the girl, saying that he is their only hope, and they must come to terms with this. Some time later, events continue to happen in Tao's house, where a spirit named Po has already brought all the ingredients. There were a lot of them, and all of them were necessary in order to prepare just one dish. Ingredients on the table included the best chicken breast, excellent wine, seasonings, dirt, flowers, and fruits. Now everything really depended on the main character, because they helped him in any way they could. Turning around and looking at Josie, Ting saw a very scary creature that looked at him with such a look as if it wanted to kill him. The calm girl, in turn, asked him not to talk nonsense, because she wants to see how this guy cooks. Smiling, the boy exclaimed that in this case they need to start. The preparation process began, and the first to be opened was the fine wine. This wonderful wine was about 500 years old, but it was poured into the dirt. It turned out that this was the recipe, and Tin realized that now it was necessary to deal with the meat. Taking one of the seasonings, he began to act, and continued to cook. After marinating the chicken, he stuffed it with seasonings that the spirit kindly brought to him. For viewers who knew nothing about cooking, this was extremely surprising and defied explanation. Once the chicken was stuffed with spices, Tin immediately started sprinkling dirt on top of it. The audience thought it was simply disgusting, and they wanted to see if the dragon's cook knew what he was doing. Although Ting can't use his hands, a knife, or even a spatula, so he has to find another way to cook food, and he just has to wait. And if those present do not want or cannot help, then they should at least simply not be disturbed. Some time later, the dish was almost ready, and the rooster was covered in mud. Concerned, Tao turned around and exclaimed that it didn't even look tasty and she didn't want to deal with it because she would die from eating it. Even the spirit needed to go to the toilet, which is why he wanted to leave the main character alone for a while. Suddenly, Tin jumped up and told the ghost that he, as a chef, could not do without him, which is why he ordered him not to leave. Grabbing the ghost, the boy began to order him what to do next. Namely, it was necessary to warm up this substance thoroughly, and then Tao's house could be opened. The spirit had to try hard not to let Josie down. Using his magical abilities, the spirit began to use magic to heat the lump of dirt and the rooster. The sight was truly impressive, and Tin could not take his eyes off it. All the substance that the dragon's cook had prepared began to burn and turned very black. Looking at the spirit, the boy remembered that they really had a lot of guests, which is why he wanted to know something. Namely, he wanted to know how much it would cost to reproduce this dish. The deeply distressed spirit explained that he did not need money for this function, and everything was done for free. Po also wanted to give away the magic crystal that the last dragon cook left behind. The crystal was truly impressive, and Ting wanted to understand if it had something to do with the Tao house. Immortals who want to eat must pay with crystals, these crystals are the money in this world. And this crystal is the key to activating the restaurant function. Suddenly, Pa started shouting that if Tin did something worthwhile, he would give him the crystal, but it would be a waste of the crystal. The guy clearly didn't like this behavior on the part of the assistant, and he asked him to shut up, because he was talking a lot. Still, the ghost very much doubted that the guy would be able to prepare something useful, and asked to show his strength. Immediately after this, Ting decided to put the crystal in the locker in order to activate the ability of food reproduction. The whole room began to be illuminated by a very bright light, which was visible 1000 m from here. The reproduction of food was a truly impressive process, and the hero watched it without taking his eyes off. The unusual dish began to glow with a bright light, because with the help of magical abilities it was gradually supposed to multiply. The food duplication began to take place, and the mud ball was enveloped in fire. After which, the cooked food began to spin very quickly around its axis, which caused Tin great surprise. Many pillars of smoke began to rise upward and strange explosions occurred in the air. Immediately after this, there was a huge amount of prepared food in the air, and it was incredible. Ghostly hands began to appear from space and begin cooking. The spirit immediately explained that Tao's house can not only reproduce the ingredients, but also repeat his cooking technique. These ghostly hands will copy the main character. After finishing cooking, only the last ingredient remained, namely, spices that were poured directly onto the dirt. Po was indignant at this, because he saw that all the spices were poured onto a lump of dirt. Suddenly, Tin clapped his hands, thereby signaling that the dish was ready. What he saw upset the ghost even more, because he had no idea how such food could be eaten. And he immediately began to cry, because Pa knew that such a person could not be trusted, because the cooked dish looked like stones, and not like tasty chicken that you can eat. Realizing that this was the end, the spirit began to collect his things, because he understood that because of this, Tao's house would be destroyed. Suddenly, a bright light began to appear in the sky, as if a portal was appearing through which someone had to pass. Looking up, the guy also didn't understand what was happening here. The clouds gradually began to disperse, and now it was known that the guests were very close. The guards who descended from heaven were incredibly hungry, and were very happy that Tao's house was finally open. The alarmed spirit began to panic, and shouted at the guy to let Josie bring him back to Earth, otherwise he would be a dead man. Smiling, the hero didn't even understand what the phantom was talking about. After all, the best wine and good food will allow guests to enjoy their stay in Tao's house, which is why he began to invite dear guests. The divine guests gradually descended from heaven and landed on Earth. The armored guards were very serious because they believed that they could taste the wonderful dishes. But when they looked at these dishes, they did not understand how they could eat these coal balls, because they had come too far to do so. The guards really didn't like the look of these dishes, they even began to think that it was some kind of joke. The worried ghost began to make excuses, saying that they had difficulties, which is why they were unable to prepare decent dishes. The enraged guard did not like this because they are responsible for guarding the 4 gates and maintaining order in the heavenly space, which is why it is unknown why the Tao house cannot complete its task. Because they have been saying for decades that the dragon chef has not yet appeared, and they have not tolerated it, but now that the dragon chef has returned to his place, they rushed here, and they are greeted like this. If the brothers are not satisfied now, then there is nothing left to do but demolish Tao's house. Very worried, the ghost tried to calm them down, telling them not to be angry, because they could return tomorrow to give them some time. Suddenly, someone exclaimed to the heavenly warriors that they were glad to see them in Tao's house. Pa didn't like this very much, because he told the fool not to stick his head out. As it turned out, the main character said this, because he understood that the guests had come, but the ghost did not let them in, and this was wrong. As he approached, he accidentally tripped over a stone, and because of his awkwardness, he immediately fell to the floor, disgracing himself in front of the guests. The guards immediately leaned towards the guy and wanted to find out who he was. Feeling very awkward, the slightly embarrassed guy replied that he was the dragon's cook. For the guards, this was extremely surprising, because the dragon's cook could not be such a brat like him. But the guy decided to destroy this stereotype and said that young people can have the status of a dragon. Among the 3 kingdoms, the heavenly is the most important, immortals make the most important decisions, they have control over everything and everyone except the culinary arts, so the dragon cook is chosen from the human kingdom, where cooking flourishes. Although they did not know how to cook, they understood that it was impossible to learn how to do it at the highest level without practicing for many years, and the guy was too young and simply could not be a dragon chef. Suddenly, the guard wanted to attack the guy for lying to them. The frightened boy did not understand what to do in this situation, but fortunately, Josie was nearby and wanted to help. With great speed, she flew towards Ting to get him out of such a difficult situation. Using the maximum of her dexterity, the girl instantly found herself not far from the scene of events, and she hit the guard to help the hero survive. The guy was very happy that his savior Josie had finally arrived here. This behavior on the part of the guards made the girl very angry, and she ordered them not to dare fight on her territory. Instantly, the guards immediately fell to the floor and began to apologize to respected Josie. But the chief guard remained unmoved, and was indignant that this boy said that he was the dragon's cook, as if he was deceiving them. Looking at the head guard, Josie said that she found him herself, and then asked if they really wanted to argue with her. They really didn't want to argue because they saw how strong the goddess was compared to them. Nevertheless, the guards calmed down and decided that in this situation it was necessary to find a compromise. The frightened men decided that it was necessary to leave as quickly as possible so as not to be beaten. The hero was clearly not happy with this outcome of events, and he asked the guards to stop, but no one understood why he was trying to do this, because such behavior is fraught with death. Hearing the guy, the chief guard turned around to listen to what he would tell him. In order to demonstrate his dish, the hero decided to take out a stick that was not far from him, and he threw it somewhere to the side, performing an extraordinary trick. It turned out that the same wooden stick fell into the dish that he had previously prepared. Gradually, the ball of mud began to crack, and food began to be visible from it. A bright light came from the mud ball through the cracks that had just been made. The sight was truly amazing because chicken feathers started coming out of the mud. In turn, the hero was sure that the guards would like the food he prepared for them. What they saw literally blinded them, and everyone tried to close their eyes so as not to injure them. From the mud ball emerged a cooked and very appetizing chicken that looked quite edible. Seeing this, all the guards were fascinated, because the chicken was very appetizing, and the smell emanating from it was incredible. Even the spirit, along with Josie, began to smell the very pleasant smell that came from the fully cooked dish. The smart guy decided to invite his guests, saying that it was necessary to eat this dish while it was still hot. The girl decided to taste the dish first, and she broke off a small piece of chicken. A little embarrassed, she sniffed the chicken first before eating it, but as soon as a piece of such delicious chicken fell into her mouth, she decided to taste it properly. The excited guards wanted to know, "Dear Josie, what this dish tasted like." Instantly, Josie blushed, and her expression suddenly changed, as if she was experiencing maximum pleasure. The joyful girl exclaimed that this dish was truly delicious and very tasty. The guards also could no longer tolerate this annoying hunger, and began to eat everything they could get their hands on. As soon as they enjoyed the food, they immediately realized that the taste gradually revealed itself in a new way, and the dish was truly luxurious. Everyone immediately realized that this young man was indeed a real dragon chef. Confused, Josie wanted to ask the boy what kind of dish this was. After coming up with a name, Ting exclaimed that this dish is called heavenly chicken. As a rule, chicken is steamed, baked or fried. All this allows you to get an incredibly tasty dish. However, the heavenly chicken is prepared without plucking or cutting, and is sealed in wet clay. Spices and mushrooms in the belly of the chicken form an assortment of flavors. All this is slowly cooked over coals, but the aroma and broth are inside, remaining unnoticed by the unknowing person. But once the clay casing is opened, the chicken feathers fall out on their own, releasing flavor and smell, making the chicken more flavorful, rich and tender than other dishes. This recipe with earthly minds seems to have been suggested by heaven, that is why the dish is called heavenly chicken. All the guards immediately began to praise the guy, saying that the dish was truly wonderful and the chicken was wonderful. Then they admitted that they were wrong. Now there was no longer any doubt about it. They also wanted to congratulate Josie on the opening of the Tao's house, and the return of the dragon chef. Spirit Pa also announced that Tao's house is now open. Looking at this guy, Josie knew that he deserved such praise. Meanwhile, the hero was thinking about his future plan, thinking it through completely. The next step was to ask Josie for heavenly pills because he needed to heal his hands. Some time later, evening came and events continued in the heavenly kingdom. Josie and Po were happy about some event, and admired something very bright. In front of them was a giant crystal, and they could not believe that 10 million were displayed on it. The hero still didn't understand anything, and wanted to find out what this thing was in front of him, and what this number meant. It turned out that this is a crystal. They use it to calculate the profit of the Taoed house. 10,000 is the number of chickens sold today, and some also leave ratings and comments. Not understanding what was happening here, the guy was shocked and wanted to raise what kind of comments were left by people who tried his dishes. In order to see all the comments, it was necessary to drag the slider down to see them. The spirit decided to do this and dragged the slider down to see the comments. There were a lot of legendary figures in the comments who really liked the dish from the House of Taoed and wanted to try more varieties of food. And for Tin it was really a lot of pressure, because he couldn't even imagine that so many people would try his food in one day. In any case, he is now a dragon cook, and an unusual person, and he should show at least a little interest, exclaimed Josie. She tells him that he will be a celebrity and he should think carefully about his next dish. Raising his hands, the smart guy exclaimed that it seemed like his little sister had forgotten something. Pretending that she did not understand anything, the girl wanted to ask what she could have forgotten. Looking the girl straight in the eyes, the hero exclaimed that she had forgotten about the heavenly pill, as if she had decided to deceive him. Laughing at this suggestion, the girl asked the spirit to bring his jar of snacks. Instantly the phantom arrived with an unusual jar containing various snacks. Handing the guy an unusual candy, the kind spirit gave it away. Tin couldn't believe his eyes, because he couldn't imagine how this candy could really cure him. Josie understood that the average person still underestimated the Taoed house, and they should take this pill, because after that they would have another advantage. As the spirit flew closer, he decided to explain that Josie was a famous businesswoman in heaven. Continuing to look at this pill, the hero did not understand how it could calm him down at all. Meanwhile, events continued to happen in the real world. Upset grandfather Mo Hong sat alone, waiting for his grandson to show up and visit him. Sighing heavily, the elderly man did not understand where Tin was. Remembering past events, he began to think about how his teleportation happened, after which he disappeared. At that same second, from behind, someone turned to grandfather. But when he turned around, the old man saw no one at all, as if he had only imagined it. Realizing that it was just his imagination, he sighed heavily again and understood that he might never see his grandson again. Once again someone exclaimed that grandfather was here, and the voice seemed to be coming from afar. Suddenly, a portal formed, right not far from Mo Hong, from which someone was about to appear. And it really was so. The joyful grandson exclaimed that it was him, Mo Ting. This event really made the grandfather very happy, and he wanted to find out from his grandson where he had been all this time, and when he would finally return to the ordinary world. Unfortunately, the guy could not yet say when he would return, but he asked not to worry, because he also really liked it in the heavenly world. Having shed a stingy manly tear, the grandfather asked him to promise him that he would not expose himself to danger, and everything would be fine. Patting his grandson on the cheek, Mo Hong was very glad that he was okay. The joyful boy decided to show his grandfather something, because changes had occurred in him. Taking an apple out of his pocket, he wanted to show a trick that he had been unable to do for so long. First, he decided to throw an apple in order to demonstrate what he wanted. And from the second pocket he took out a blade, with the help of which it was necessary to perform one very important action. Concentrating on the apple, the guy decided to do the same trick that his sworn enemy had previously done. Starting to cry, the grandfather could not believe his eyes, because he realized that his grandson had actually been healed. Recalling the events of the past, the doctor explained that this child had neurological and muscular problems in both hands, but he also asked not to worry, because this would not affect his health, just fine motor skills in his hands would not develop. Even when the little guy was asked as a child what he wanted to be when he grew up, Tin answered that he wanted to be a cook, like his grandfather. When he was older, his grandfather asked him not to play with knives and to be obedient. Because the little guy still couldn't do it, due to poor hand motor skills, he couldn't hold the knife normally. Then Mo Hong ordered him to never touch the knife again, because he was not capable of wielding it. Remembering these words, Tin began to act, and in front of him was the very apple with which it was necessary to accomplish his plan. Feeling the strength in his hands, the main character continued to perform a very difficult trick, although he experienced unusual sensations. The healed hand could finally obey him, and he calmly held the knife. Swinging, Tin made a lot of small cuts on the apple, which was literally flying in the air. Although he held his hand, he was still able to perform such a complex and unusual trick. Suddenly, strange feelings began to overcome him, and Tin thought that he had failed. The apple jumped off the knife and gradually began to fall to the floor. Not understanding what was happening, grandfather continued to watch the apple, waiting for that same trick. Picking up the apple, this only made the boy laugh. From so many actions, he was very tired, because he was not yet used to controlling his hands, but he wanted to train more in order to achieve success. Looking at the portal, Tin realized that he needed to go to the heavenly kingdom. Trembling with surprise, grandfather stood rooted to the spot and did not understand what was happening. The grandson nevertheless decided to say goodbye to him. They say that time is running out, so he must go. But turning around, the guy also promised that when he returned, he would cook them the best dinner. As he began his teleportation, Tin also asked his grandfather not to worry about him and wished him luck. A few seconds later, the portal to the heavenly kingdom was closed, and grandfather could not believe his eyes. Continuing to cry, he was truly very happy that his grandson was finally healed. Thus, looking at the sky, grandfather realized that now he no longer worries about it. The old man was really happy with this turn of events, because he understood that this was a great chance for his descendant. Some time later, events continued to occur in the heavenly kingdom. The beautiful nature impressed with its majesty and beauty. At the same time, someone was sitting in the clearing and eating incredibly delicious food. It was Josie, and she was very pleased that she had eaten so well. And the spirit, in turn, continued to eat and enjoyed the chicken. The feeling of being full was wonderful for them, and the fact that they ate in company brought even more pleasure. Suddenly, the spirit noticed something very surprising that was happening nearby. There was someone under a giant waterfall, and he was training very hard. It turned out that it was Ting, who had been training with incredible efforts and was holding back the water on the blade to become stronger. His hands were very painful, but overcoming the pain, he continued to train to achieve what he wanted. He even began to cry from the pain, but he understood that the training could not be stopped and he had to continue. Soon, he still could not restrain himself and fell into the water, because it was difficult to continue training. The excited spirit noticed that the man was drowning in the water after he fell. But this was not so, and the hero, being conscious, began to swim underwater. Gathering his strength, he emerged from the water like a fish with a giant blade. Continuing his training, the hero grabbed the blade again and began to act. With superhuman effort, he continued to hold back the waterfall with the blade using his hands. His facial expression was impossible to understand, because he was a man who struggled with the feeling of pain and did everything possible to achieve what he wanted. Once again, the spirit began to worry about the person, and turned to Josie, saying that Ting was acting like crazy, and there was definitely something wrong with him. Then the girl explained that she did everything to cure his hands. If he had not started trying so hard, he would have been an ordinary ungrateful boy. Besides, no one is forcing him. He himself understands that while his hands are useless if he will not work, then they will remain so. Although Josie did not argue that the heavenly chicken is very tasty, not all dishes can be prepared with his current abilities, and if the menu is not updated, they will be lost. This guy was indeed a very large investment on Josie's part. To give Ting more time to train, they moved to Tae space. Here time flows differently, and this is expensive. By the way, time hardly moves here. A year in Tae space is a minute in the outside world. The merchant told her that Tae's space can only be rented for a week, and if a longer period is needed, then you need to pay for it with treasures. With tears in her eyes, the girl realized that this old pig had taken all her jewelry that she had accumulated over the years. Coming closer, the hero put his hand on her shoulder and asked her not to worry. After all, he was not going to let her down, and when his hands were in order, the restaurant would be even better than before. The spirit asked Tin to immediately take a break as soon as he got tired, but the guy was so diligent that he was just going to have a little snack and then continue training again. Sighing heavily, as if nothing had happened, he began to eat the apple. But at that very second, a strange cloudiness appeared in his eyes, due to which he gradually began to lose his mind. His legs began to give way, and Ting dropped the very apple he was holding in his hand. It turned out that in the end he was still unable to withstand such a serious workout, and he should have taken a break. In any case, Josie understood that this guy was not particularly talented, but he was really trying. But unfortunately, right now he doesn't have much time to rest. That is why the goddess decided to use her magical abilities in order to help the young man. Using her magic, she gradually began to bring the guy to his senses so that he could train again. The magic really worked, and with every second the main character became better and better, and his condition returned to normal. Gradually, he began to open his eyes, and Josie and Pa watched him all the time so that he would not get worse. The worried guy began to look around and thought that he had been sleeping for 2 whole days. The girl, in turn, ordered him to continue to train faster with his sword, because then he would be able to handle a kitchen knife. The training at the waterfall continued again, with large amounts of water flowing down the rocks. The entire weight of the water was directed literally to one point, on which the main character stood. Suddenly, one of the stone blocks began to fall directly on the guy, which is why Josie shouted at him to be more careful. In fact, even when the boulder fell on him, he was easily able to withstand the blow because his arms had become much stronger. The brave boy exclaimed that he needed to be quieter, because everything was fine, and he was able to withstand this blow. It was really impressive for the spirit because the guy was developing incredibly quickly. But the training was not over yet, and Ting wanted to achieve more impressive success. With deft movements, he gradually began to make his way towards the giant block of stone. And using all his strength, he hit the stone directly, and thereby cut it into many small pieces. The spectacle was truly impressive, and the spirit gave a rating of 10 points for such a performance. The hero really liked this feeling, because he thought that his strength could not be compared with anyone else. Suddenly, someone behind him threw a bone from a chicken that had been gnawed at him. It turned out that it was Josie, who did not like the whole spectacle. The girl was literally furious, and ordered the guy to be less happy, because these are all little things, and he should continue training, because he will not receive any food. Some time later, the hero finally decided to rest, because he was simply dying of hunger. The hungry boy really liked Josie's cooking and wanted to try even more food, but the goddess did not want to waste time, and asked Tina to give her amulet. Not understanding what was happening, the guy began to remove the amulet from his neck. He only assumed that the goddess wanted to give him a brand new sword for training. Really though, it's time for the knife. For the unsuspecting Ting, this was truly surprising, but he wanted to see that very knife. Using her magical abilities, the goddess began to summon a knife, which was intended for the dragon's cook. The sharpest knife in this world is reserved for the great chef. The family heirloom gradually began to turn into that same knife that had incredible properties. The magical artifact took on a new look and gradually changed under the influence of magic. A pillar that arose from the created portal was visible for many thousands of kilometers. It was truly impressive, and even the goddess and spirit watched what was happening. Only the hero did not understand what was happening, and closed his eyes, because such a bright light blinded him. A moment later, a giant knife was visible through the clouds and began to fall to the ground. Opening his eyes a little, the boy noticed that the knife was falling right on him. He was extremely frightened, because he did not understand what was happening, and why he needed such a giant knife. An ordinary person could not even imagine that it was that same knife, and it was unknown how to use such a huge thing. The spirit looked at the frightened boy and asked him not to make hasty conclusions, because this is the sharpest knife, and it is a great relic. It can be used directly, and it is necessary to touch it. The embarrassed guy couldn't even imagine that in order to transform a knife, you need to touch it. It turned out that the dangerous knife appeared even before the formation of the 3 worlds. It is a symbol of the art of cooking itself. One can say that the one who masters it will become a master, because of which one should go and give it shape. But just think carefully about what exactly the hero wants his knife to be, and it will immediately change. But the spirit also warned that one must be very careful. In fact, the ungrateful boy didn't even listen to the spirit, and immediately ran to the knife, because he thought that everything would be smooth. Touching it, he began to imagine the desired knife with which he would like to cook. At first, Ting began to imagine different shapes of knives, but realized that the cleaver shape was not suitable. The shape of the katana was also inappropriate because it can cut hands rather than food. Even the pirate's favorite knife didn't fit, even though it was a childhood favorite. In any case, it was necessary to calm down and think carefully, because the knife will be needed in each of the stages of cooking. Remembering the past, the guy began to imagine what kind of knife his grandfather used. He remembered the same cleaver with which Mo Hong skillfully prepared culinary masterpieces. Then it dawned on the main character that he would like to get the same knife as his grandfather had. It turned out that this knife is called Wenwu, which a good cook should skillfully use in his hand. Although this knife looked ordinary, it is possible to do anything with it. It is difficult to master it the first time, but an experienced chef works wonders with this knife. At that very second, the hero exclaimed that the Wenwu knife was what he needed. As soon as he said this, the giant knife immediately disappeared from sight. The excited guy began to look around to find the very knife he wanted so much. Suddenly, something very unusual came into his field of vision. Namely, the same Wenwu knife that he wanted so badly. The joyful guy exclaimed to Josie and Pa that he had done it, and turned the knife into the desired one. To celebrate, he also wanted to know what he needed to do now. It turned out that the show was about to begin, and Tin would need to defend himself and be very careful. Not understanding what was happening, the boy clarified why he needed to be careful. But looking at the knife, some strange feeling began to overcome him, and the knife seemed to be trying to slip out of his hand. After which, the giant cleaver began to glow and emitted rays of magic. The power of the knife was impressive, and the hero could hardly control it. The knife literally began to control the hero, and the air ascended, taking the owner with it. Immediately after this, there was an explosion of incredible proportions from a surge of magic. Meanwhile, Josie and the spirit continued to watch everything that was happening, and were a little worried, because they were worried about the guy. Because after such a strong explosion, only a trace on the ground remained of an ordinary person. Looking up, the girl knew that this guy was now up there. And this was really so, because the magic knife raised him to a great height, as if he wanted to show something. Some time later, Tin woke up, still holding the knife in his hands. It was difficult to understand what was happening, but the boy was covered in bruises. The excited girl ran up and did not understand why he even touched the knife without listening to the spirit. Due to the fact that Tin almost died, he exclaimed that he needed at least a little rest. Because of this, he gradually began to let go of the knife that was in both hands. It turned out that as soon as the hero lets go of the knife, he will immediately lose the chance to control it, which is why he cannot be released. Frightened, he squeezed the knife with all his strength, because he did not want to lose it. As soon as he touched the knife, the so-called taming process began. If he let go of it now, it would mean that he was giving up and all his efforts would be in vain. Josie also explained that taming a knife is a test of his will and patience. It will last 10 days, but after taming, he will be able to control this knife perfectly. The angry guy didn't understand why he wasn't told this before, but now at least he has the stimulus, and he only needs to hold on for 10 days. And also, the girl decided to warn that the strength of the knife will change, which is why you need to be more careful. At that same second, the knife was activated again, and glowed with a bright light, as if emitting magic. Realizing that he needed to hold on, the hero understood that the competition with the knife had begun again. Suddenly, the knife hit its owner right on the forehead with all its force, forming a giant bump on his head. His comrades immediately noticed that the guy was still conscious and ready to continue taming the knife. The brave guy exclaimed that he was not as simple as the knife thought, which is why he ordered him to attack again, because he wanted to repel his attack. On the second day the spectacle was even worse, because the knife controlled the guy in such a way that he was thrown from side to side and hit the trees. On the third day, even more terrible events took place, because the knife wanted to fly up with its owner and pierce an entire rock. The sight was truly shameful because Tin was thoroughly humiliated. Some time later, the test was coming to an end, and the main character was all wounded and beaten, but continued to hold on. Although the guy was dying, he still held on, and held the knife with both hands. It turned out that it was already the 10th day, and the poor guy was literally tortured to death. Anxious, Josie finally realized that it was already the 10th day. Then she asked Tin if he was holding a knife, because the test was already approaching the end. A vision arose of the main character, in which there was a strange luminous gaze that was closely watching him. After which, someone unknown exclaimed to him to wake up. Having opened his eyes, the man did not understand who was speaking to him and who was addressing him. The unknown creature laughed at this reaction and continued to watch the man. The teeth of this creature were incredibly huge. They were capable of eating a person in literally one bite. Such a sight was truly impressive for a guy who had never seen anything like this before. In fact, there was a giant dragon in front of Ting, who was watching him intently. Looking at his hand, the guy thought that he had already let go of the knife and had not passed this test. Suddenly, the dragon turned to him, asking if he was really the boy who wanted to control him. The stunned boy did not immediately understand this question, but then realized that this dragon was the knife. The dragon again began to order the mere mortal to give up and not suffer anymore. After all, if he asks the dragon, then maybe he will give some of his power and make the main character the best dragon cook. Because you don't even need to control the dragon to get some of its power. Laughing, the golden dragon asked if the guy was ready for this, because he wouldn't tell anyone. The confident guy firmly said that he didn't want this. This answer really impressed the dragon, because he did not expect that a mere mortal would refuse such an offer. After all, Ting explained that his friends told him that it was necessary to pass this test. And as his grandfather once said, a cook cannot be called a chef if he cannot control his own tools. Now that this knife is in his hands, he must have complete control over it. This kind of answer angered the dragon, because the words were really loud, and they, mortals, are so greedy and stupid, always striving for power that does not belong to them. Suddenly, the dragon opened its mouth and showed a certain magical sphere, and said that this was all. The excited mortal continued to watch everything that was happening, and did not understand what was happening. After all, as it turned out, the dragon right now wanted to show an ordinary mortal the taste of death. A bright light began to literally fall on Ting and surround his entire body, creating an explosion of incredible proportions. Standing rooted to the spot, the guy simply waited for his fate, because he did not know what to do in this situation. Because of this explosion, literally everything that was nearby was wiped off the face of the earth. Meanwhile, the protagonist's comrades noticed something very surprising. Namely, that their friend Ting began to come to life, and suddenly continued to breathe, holding a knife in his hands. Experiencing severe pain and overcoming his fear, he was still able to achieve what he wanted and survive. At the same time, the spirit was worried that if the hero couldn't stand it, he might go crazy, like one of the dragon's cooks earlier. Josie was determined and also confident that this would not happen. Deciding to help the guy, the girl began to apply her magical abilities and use them. Touching the victim's head, the goddess used all her power to restore the young man's mind and body. The sight was truly amazing, and the spirit was delighted, because it was a secret magic called verbal flow that Josie exchanged with Ting. Opening his eyes, the unsuspecting guy could not understand what was happening here. After all, his body began to literally collapse in front of the golden dragon, who was happy that this happened. According to the mysterious creature, this was just the beginning. The next test was already prepared, and the unknown container began to descend to the floor. It turned out that it was a cauldron of boiling oil that was approaching the main character. There was actually boiling oil inside that was incredibly hot. Laughing, the dragon asked the guys to think again and come to their senses before it's too late. Otherwise, a rain of hot oil will await him. Experiencing a strong feeling of pain, the guy continued to hold on, although he screamed in anger. But he knew he couldn't give up, and he couldn't tell the dragon that he wasn't ready to go through with it. The boiler with boiling oil began to tip over, and the same oil began to pour out of it. A huge waterfall of boiling oil fell on the body of an ordinary person. The pain was hellish, and Ting tried to hold on until the last, and endured the pain in order to complete what he started. Suddenly, he heard Josie's voice, who begged him to hold on to the last and not give up. The girl knew very well what he was going through now, but he should have remembered that this is just a test, and everything that happens here is an illusion, and should not be confused with reality. Because of which it is necessary to find a way out and hold on until the last. The goddess sincerely believed that he would be able to complete this test. Looking at this dragon again, the guy realized that this was all an illusion, and he really needed to find a way out. The golden dragon was amazed that the guy still did not give up, because there was nothing wrong with this, and he should have given in a little. The next test was that 1,000 knives would pierce the main character's body. A huge number of blades began to float in the air and try to penetrate the body of an innocent person. The furious dragon exclaimed that man could not defeat him, and he would turn him into mincemeat. Realizing that there was no other way out, Ting continued to stand still and thought about what to do next. Blades flew before his eyes and wanted to hit his body. Many daggers rained down on him, making it literally impossible to pass the test, as they tormented his body, making it impossible for him to do anything other than stand still. Suddenly, we are transported to events that happened earlier in the life of the main character. He remembered how his grandfather cooked in the kitchen and taught him the culinary arts. A top chef told Tin that it is very important to control the heat when frying meat. Suddenly, the grandfather noticed that the baby was reading something in the kitchen. It turned out that these were notes from 3 chefs from Zhejiang, and the book contained very cool knife techniques. The little boy was really very happy with the thought that perhaps he would one day become as good a cook as his grandfather. The baby knives were really impressive and very cool. Unfortunately, the elderly man understood that due to a hand disease that arose after birth, the boy would clearly not be able to control the knife. After all, earlier, all the knives that he picked up fell out of them. After which, we are transported to the events that occur in the head of the main character, where he was able to throw all the knives that were thrown at him and survived 1,000 blades. This was a truly impressive decision for the dragon, as he had never seen anything like it. The brave warrior continued to stand in place without moving, and thought about how he could win this battle. Opening his eyes completely, he looked into the eyes of the golden dragon. Immediately after this, there was an explosion of incredible proportions, which occurred due to the intersection of views. Instantly they found themselves on the water, and stood watching each other. Indignant, the frightened dragon asked how an ordinary person could break his illusion. For the boy it was obvious, because he realized that it was an illusion, and he could not hurt him, and what he felt was just a deception of consciousness. The dragon was not trying to kill him, it was something like cooking lessons. And his tests had a pattern: hot oil, flame, cooking, blade, heating. When he said about minced meat, the hero immediately realized that this was a normal cooking process. It's just that he himself became a kind of ingredient in this main dish. Not understanding anything, the dragon objected again, because even if he understood this, that fear was impossible to overcome. Fire, hot oil, a blade, it hurts a lot, but he realized that all this is on the other side of cooking, and every second of cooking is so important that incredible concentration is required, and you need to enjoy it and not think about anything else. Crossing his arms, the noble hero decided to thank the dragon. They say that these feelings were truly indescribable. Laughing, the golden dragon exclaimed that this is how his great love for cooking helped him. This ordinary young man was a completely stupid child in the dragon's opinion. But still, realizing his loss, the dragon exclaimed that the test had been passed. Feeling the taste of victory, Tin was truly happy that he succeeded. After which, the dragon asked the boy if he was ready to control him, the sharpest knife, which would now be completely at his disposal. Suddenly, with a heavy sigh, it turned out that the young man was unhappy, because he wanted to talk about control a little later, and this 1,000 knives was very cool, he would like to remember it forever, which is why he asked the dragon if he wanted to do it again. The golden dragon was really shocked by such a proposal, because he didn't understand what was wrong with this guy. The indignant dragon thought that his master was crazy, but the young man continued to insist on his own and told him to continue the test again. Meanwhile, Josie was very angry and wanted to end this quickly. Because of this, she even started pinching the main character, in the hope that he would wake up. Continuing to wake him up, the girl asked if he had received her message and ordered him to get up so that he would not dare to die. This behavior began to frighten the spirit, because Tin was very badly wounded, and no one knew what was really happening to him there. Suddenly, the singing of a bird was heard, which was getting closer to the scene every second. It turned out that it was a postal crane, which was approaching with a certain message. Having opened the message, Josie decided to read it to understand who was addressing her. The letter stated that a long time had passed, and the sender had heard that the dragon chef had returned to the restaurant, so he would like to visit it tomorrow to taste the feast of the 8 divine dishes. With horror, Josie immediately realized that this letter was addressed from the righteous Tai. This was really too much, as if the righteous man was mocking him. Ting's life and mind were in danger now, and there was no need to prepare 8 dishes now, and even for tomorrow. The situation was truly hopeless, and even the goddess could not imagine what to do next. Some time later, events continued to occur in Tao's house. The excited girl did not understand what to do in this situation, and how to generally deal with the dragon cook, who was still unconscious. A very worried spirit addressed Josie, saying that the cook still had not woken up, and perhaps he would cope with this task like last time. But the goddess understood that this guy knew nothing about the 8 divine dishes, about preparation, processing, knife technique. These are not the same thing, and he did not even train. In any case, their lease on Taya's space hasn't ended yet, so they can go there with Ting when he wakes up and practice. In fact, even if the protagonist learns how these dishes are prepared, the ingredients that go into them are very rare, almost impossible to find in a single day. The alarmed girl asked the spirit to get ready and run, because she would take him to Earth, and there he could eat and drink as much as he wanted. The excited team continued to think about what to do and how to get out of such a difficult situation. Suddenly, the guy gradually began to come to his senses and tried to open his eyes. As soon as he did this, sweat began to appear on his face, as if he were in a very hot place. And this was really so, because Tin was in a steam bath, like an ingredient from a dish. Even the dragon did not feel well, because he was extremely hot. The smart guy concluded that it turns out that the steam is unevenly distributed inside and outside the ingredients, but with good control you can create a rich texture and taste. Once again Tin exclaimed that he wanted to go through this test again. The golden dragon was shocked by such a request because the young man had already said that he passed this test perfectly the 3rd time, and it was approved, so it is unknown why he would not calm down. But for him it was a unique experience. Ordinary cooks can only evaluate a dish by appearance and smell, but now he can remember every detail of the preparation and cannot miss this opportunity. The cunning dragon said that he thinks that the boy has already understood a lot of things, but he has a limited supply of energy, which is why he can no longer do such tests. This answer clearly did not suit the main character, and he exclaimed that he was the best knife of the 3 worlds, which is why he needed to continue working. Starting to cry, the dragon accepted his fate and continued to recreate the trials. First the hot flame test began. Each test had to be repeated 100 times. The next test was hot oil, which was repeated 65 times. The next test was a stream of blades. 1,000 blades flew at the main character, recreating minced meat. The guy liked it very much, and he literally shouted to the golden dragon to continue creating challenges. Some time later, the golden dragon became weak because he had repeated the tests more than 300 times, and begged for God's sake to be given the opportunity to rest, because he really couldn't do it anymore. Realizing the complexity of the situation, the dragon thought that if this were not a world of imagination, then he would immediately run away, and this guy is crazy, which is why it is necessary to deal less with something like this. At the same time, the boy had already begun to think about whether he should get out of this test. Hearing this, the dragon immediately exclaimed that if he released him, he would do whatever the hero wanted. Jumping onto the head of a giant dragon, the smart young man wanted to talk to him, and he asked the sharpest knife to tell him about the skills of all the dragon cooks. Looking at the boy, the dragon immediately realized that he wanted to find out about all the dragon's past cooks. Thus, the golden dragon began to talk, starting with the first cook, saying that the first dragon cook was very fond of smelling his hands. Meanwhile, events continued to take place in the real world, where the main character was already tied to a chair with ropes. Josie was in charge of the dragon's cook, so she had to stay here, and she needed to protect him, which was why she couldn't be allowed to escape, so the girl wanted to take care of him. Suddenly, a very strong wind rose, which was surprising for these places. None of the deities could understand what was happening here and why such a wind suddenly appeared. A magical portal of gigantic proportions was formed, from which someone had to crawl out any minute. With every second the portal became larger and amazed with its size and dimensions. The spirit and the girl could not understand what the hell was going on here, and who came to Tao's store. The unknown person arrived in an expensive car, and several guards stood next to him. Immediately after this, the door began to open, and someone began to climb out of the driver's seat. Not understanding what was happening, Tin's comrades were shocked by what was happening. It turned out that it was the same mister who wanted to come and eat at Tao's shop. His image was truly literally dazzling and inimitable. The respected Mr.'s clothes were really strange, and Josie immediately noticed this. The man objected. After all, he has been wearing this shirt for hundreds of centuries, and there is nothing to be surprised about, because such clothes are very comfortable. Approaching Tao's house, the man noticed that it is completely different now, and before it had hundreds of floors, but he had never seen it like this before. Looking at the Tide boy, the businessman was shocked by what he saw. It turned out that the man already knew who he was, because during this time he learned a little information about him. He was a dragon cook who had never cooked. The frightened comrades did not understand how Mr. could know this, as if he were in the human world. This was indeed the case, because Josie herself showed him the way. His old man's cooking was indeed very tasty. This behavior infuriated the girl, because she realized that this scoundrel was watching her. In fact, he asked the Jade Emperor if he should worry about Josie when the previous cook died. An unreliable dragon like her went in search of a new one, but who knew that she would fall asleep for hundreds of years after a good feast? And Josie knows very well that the realities of the divine and demonic world are different from the human, and the only tangent is cooking, and one must at least sometimes think about how disgusting it was to eat the wind and tasteless elixirs while she was down there. So the return of the dragon chef caused a lot of noise among the three worlds, so the Jade Emperor wanted to send the girl to hard labor in the North Sea, but Mr. persuaded him to give her one last chance, and that is the 8 divine dishes. Josie immediately began to say that there is no problem with the dishes, but they don't have the right ingredients yet, and she thinks that the Jade Emperor should understand, and there is nothing here that he can eat. It turned out that even this was foreseen by the stranger who arrived here. Suddenly, he called out to his servants, telling them to open the trunk. What was there really impressed everyone, because no one could have expected it. The foresight man was simply wonderful in his own opinion because he prepared all the ingredients in advance. And if this dragon cook can prepare 8 divine dishes, it will bring her glory, and everyone will recognize her exhausting quest, and if not, then she will go to the North Sea. Angry, the girl exclaimed that this scoundrel had been eating and drinking with her for years, and now he was doing this. 8 divine dishes is the most famous dish, which was developed more than 5,000 years ago by a dragon cook, and there is not a single recipe left in all 3 worlds. This dish could only be prepared if the cook himself who invented it would rise from the dead. Suddenly, the girl turned around and shouted that he might be able to send her to the North Sea, but first she would beat him thoroughly. Feeling very angry, Josie continued her attack without sparing any effort. But according to the stranger, this act was really stupid, and he began to use his magical abilities. Summoning a magical seal, he summoned a defense that was supposed to repel the attack. Many magical spheres arrived in time for the girl who did not understand anything, and instantly all the magical spheres turned into ropes that wrapped Josie and did not allow her to move. This man was sent by the Jade Emperor, challenging his will. She can play in the grave, so Josie in this case needs to pray for her future. Suddenly, someone behind the scoundrel shouted for the girl to be released. This turn of events really surprised the powerful man, and he turned around. Looking at the chair, it was clear that no one else was sitting on it, and all the ropes were torn. The worried girl realized that Tin had finally woken up from his long hibernation. This was truly a joyful event for them because a savior had arrived who was ready to fight for his friends. At that same second, the earth began to tremble, as if a strong earthquake had begun. The house of Taot began its transformation, and the transformation began after the hero improved his skills. An ordinary trading shop began to turn into something more that could amaze visitors. The result of his labors was truly impressive, because everyone saw that Taot's house was changing. No one could believe their eyes because the size of the house was truly impressive. Once the transformation of the house was completed, everyone could see the beautiful mansion, which amazed with its beauty and scale, and was really expensive. Its size was simply gigantic. It looked more like a multi-story high-rise building than an ordinary house. Even the spirit began to cry with happiness, because he realized that Tin had really changed. The shocked Josie realized that Ting had mastered the knife. Even so, the house shouldn't have changed that much. In an arrogant tone, the man asked the dragon cook if he knew why such a respected person had come here. Although the boy's head was pounding, while he was unconscious, he heard that it was necessary to prepare 8 divine dishes, and this was an easy task for him. The man was not satisfied with this answer, and he asked to calm down, because he was still too young, and he needed to learn modesty, the fact that he became a dragon cook was a big mistake. After all, when the scoundrel went to the human world, he met a young man named Huang Tian. This guy is much talented and he was supposed to become a dragon chef. What he heard really enraged Tin, and he realized that he needed to take revenge, because he remembered the same scoundrel who caused the chefs to lose the fight. Also, because of this Huang Tian, the hero had to kneel down and apologize to the Huang family. Very angry, Tin exclaimed that the stranger simply had not tasted normal food. The man was dumbfounded by this answer, and ordered the weakling to do what he wanted, but he should not be the dragon's cook. In fact, the hero didn't care whether he was the dragon's cook or not. But today he was going to show all his culinary skills, and those present here will see what a real delicacy is. It was known that the 8 divine dishes was a famous dish created by an ancient culinary master after he became a dragon chef. It is made from 8 extremely rare ingredients: heavenly lake divine clam meat, golden wheat, thousand-year palmyra leaves, paradise ginseng root, devil's tail, jade bamboo shoot, crayfish of the pure soul, and 9 royal phoenix wings. Some of these ingredients are found in places inaccessible even to immortals, making them very difficult to find or grow. They say that when the dragon's cook first prepared this dish, the whole of heaven was filled with its aroma, and everyone who ate her creation said that it was the best he had ever tasted. It is known that after eating the 8 divine dishes, the strength of some gods increased. This is truly divine food. The brave warrior was ready to create this dish, and make it better than other dragon cooks had done before. The boy decided to ask the impudent man what would happen if he prepared 8 divine dishes. Laughing, the scoundrel replied that he, of course, recognized his skill as a dragon cook. But the hero was not satisfied with this, and he wanted the scoundrel to do something else in return. Namely, if Ting prepares 8 divine dishes, then the man will recognize himself as a snaggle-toothed slave, and Josie's case will be closed. This proposal was indeed very harsh, and even the spirit and the girl were surprised. The man was very angry at this request, because the hero couldn't even imagine who he was talking to. Then Ting decided to tell his story, because earlier he had been sitting quietly at home, but the respected Josie, out of the blue, kidnapped him and brought him here. She also healed his wounds, and so he plans to repay her with a good job in the title of Dragon Chef. However, the uninvited guest came here and started blaming everyone around him, which made Ting unhappy, and it is unknown why he should cook for him. The dissatisfied man shouted that the customer is always right, and he, as the dragon's cook, is obliged to serve him right now. The chef must prepare food with his soul, just as the client must feel the dish with his heart, even if he forces the hero to cook, but what comes out cannot be called a dish. In this case, the impudent man decided to play by the rules of the protagonist. If he prepares 8 divine dishes, he will immediately apologize to them and admit that he is a snaggle-toothed slave, if of course the boy can handle it. And if not, then he will not only strip him of the title of Dragon Chef, but also make his hands the same as before, and when the time comes, Huang Tian will become the new Dragon Chef. Moreover, Josie will be punished twice as severely for being an unsuitable candidate. The spirit clearly did not like what he heard, and he shouted that they did not agree, and it was not for him to decide how Josie would be punished. Suddenly, the hero put his hand on the villain's hand. Thus, they made a bet, and had to fulfill its conditions in case of winning or losing. Some time later, events continue to occur in Tao's house. In one of the offices it was discussed that this dragon cook looked somehow strange, because 8 treasures were too valuable, and perhaps it was wasteful for the boss to offer them all as ingredients. It turned out that the scoundrel had not had the 8 treasures for several thousand years, because he had only tried them together with the Jade Emperor. It was almost a cheat. It was difficult to collect the main ingredients for this dish, even more difficult to get the auxiliary ingredients, but the worst thing is to put everything together. Some ingredients are not so rare, such as the crayfish of shining ice. The advisor immediately suggested that perhaps this could make things easier for the dragon cook, but in fact, this will not make such a difficult task any easier for him. Meanwhile, events continued to happen in the kitchen. The spirit examined the kitchen, and the video showed that Tao's house had changed greatly, because all this was possible only thanks to the knife. For greater success, it was also necessary to prepare as many special dishes as possible. The sharpest knife, the #1 culinary tool in the 3 worlds, recognized Tin as its master, and it was hard to believe. Josie didn't even want to talk about it, because she believed that the spirit was a scoundrel because he bet on her double punishment. Suddenly, glass fell in the kitchen because the dragon cook accidentally dropped it. Now he was in very serious danger, because there was a serious monster not far from him, who grabbed him right by the nose and was not ready to let the boy go. It turned out that it was a cancer, which with all its claw pinched Tina's nose. Laughing, the spirit exclaimed that it was difficult to think of using an ordinary kitchen knife, that without being able to cope with the cancer of the purest soul, this is an immortal cancer that lives in the jade pond. Its combat power is so amazing that even immortals could not defeat it the first time. And if Tai had not pacified him with the help of talismans, Tin would definitely have suffered even more. Experiencing severe pain, but overcoming it, the hero began to summon the sharpest knife. As soon as that same knife was in his hands, he swung with all his might at the cancer of the purest soul to deal a crushing blow. But as it turned out, even before the blow was made, the strongest cancer immediately died the painless death of a glorious warrior. The hero really did not expect that the sharpest knife would be so aggressive, but the golden dragon explained to him that everything living and inanimate is just ingredients that are simply food. Immediately after this, the sharpest knife ordered its owner to give him the opportunity to cut the dish. The knife literally started screaming that he was very hungry and asked the guy not to stop. Not understanding what was happening, Tin stood rooted to the spot, and his friends urged him to quickly begin preparing the ingredients. Suddenly, the guy started asking Josie if she thought this cancer was very valuable. In her opinion, this was indeed the case, because it lives in the jade pond at a depth of 9,000 m, and it is unusually strong and rare, which is why it was not clear why this question was asked. Asking to look carefully, Tin picked up the crayfish and showed it to his friends. What they saw was truly amazing and made them worry. In their opinion, there was nothing special about it, because it was a female that carried the eggs. Angry, the boy began to laugh angrily and asked his friends if they knew anything about artificial breeding. Some time later, events continued to happen in the royal garden. All kinds of birds and animals that exist in the three worlds are present in the royal garden. All the animals in this garden were truly impressive and lived throughout the entire area of the garden. Looking at the water, the protagonist's comrades noticed a large amount of caviar, after which we saw how a huge number of small crayfish began to hatch from the eggs. Suddenly, someone caught one of the crayfish that was swimming nearby. It was the main character who was very happy about such an excellent catch. The joy was truly genuine, and the guy exclaimed that catching these crayfish is really much more dangerous. Meanwhile, Josie hugged the spirit and realized that they would finally start making money, and Taotia's house would be saved. But, again, Ting had never prepared the 8 divine dishes, so it was unknown how well he would do this dish. Looking at the boy, Josie was furious because she didn't understand why he was smiling, because if he didn't prepare the 8 dishes, it would be the end for them all. Continuing to smile, Tin asked the worried girl to calm down. Taking his pendant in his hand, he asked the old man to get out of it. As soon as he said this, a magical portal immediately formed, from which someone should have appeared. The spectacle was truly impressive, and the comrades could not believe their eyes. After all, the one they saw was a golden dragon that could fly and was of gigantic size. The frightened friends continued to look at this huge creature, and did not even think of moving, because fear had overcome them. Unexpectedly, the hero exclaimed that the dragon should make its face simpler, because there was no one to scare here. Frightened by the giant dragon, Josie began to shout that Ting's ancestors were great people, and he should not risk their history, otherwise he would be denied a direct path to his ancestors. At that same second, a huge explosion began to occur, and the friends thought that Tin had screwed up after all and was about to die. But when they opened their eyes, they discovered something very surprising that threw them into a stupor. Namely, the fact that the giant golden dragon turned into a small dragon who was at the service of his master and listened to any orders. The boy decided to ask his assistant if he knew how to cook crayfish of the purest soul. The clever little dragon immediately realized that his master meant cancer from the purest soul of the 8 divine dishes. This crayfish is one of the 8 divine treasures. They live in the jade pond, and have an extraordinary taste. The meat of this crayfish is light and snow-white, thanks to the energy of water and ice that the crayfish absorbs throughout its life. A dish made from it is not only an exquisite delicacy, but it has a beneficial effect on the powers of immortals. Additional products are especially important, such as bilchon leaves, rootless water that is exhausted from the well, flowers of the goddess of illusions. These 33 spices are cooked within 72 hours. Unfortunately, this dish really was not as simple as the hero had previously thought. These ingredients were not among those given to him by Tai, which makes the task very difficult. After which, the hero decides to ask the spirit if he can find the necessary ingredients in the garden of 1,000 herbs. This was ruled out because the current level of the Tao Tai house did not allow the garden to grow thousands of herbs with ingredients of such rarity. Meanwhile, Josie understood that this old scoundrel really cheated this time. Some time later, events continued to occur late in the evening. While in Tao's house, someone laughed very loudly. His laughter could literally be heard throughout the house. It was Tai who knew that Josie should have already realized that they did not have the necessary ingredients for this dish, which made him want to see her face. Although they, the immortals, are not very good cooks, he asked the dragon cook about the ingredients needed for this dish, which were not available in Tao's house. Even if they have already figured it out, they don't have time to search for spices, and they will finally kneel before him. One of the services began to praise Tai, saying that he was the brightest and truly brilliant. Suddenly, the scoundrel exclaimed that he preferred to be not the brightest, but the most insidious. At the same time, the hero and his friends were sitting in the kitchen in confusion and did not understand what to do. Through the ventilation system, laughter was very clearly heard coming from the rooms. The upset girl had already begun to think that she needed to talk to this vile old man as soon as possible. Suddenly, the brave guy decided to ask the spirit to show him all the ingredients that were in Tao's house. Using his magical abilities, Po began to show all the ingredients that were currently available. Although there were a lot of them, there was no use, because the necessary ingredients were not there. Still, the boy continued to look at the ingredients that were available, and thought about how to get out of such a difficult situation. There were many contradictions in his thoughts, but he understood that he could not give up and had to act. Even the spirit understood that there was absolutely nothing here that could be used in such a dish. Unexpectedly, Ting exclaimed that this was wonderful. Looking around, the friends could not understand what had happened to the dragon cook. Pointing his finger at the necessary ingredients, the hero asked the spirit to prepare them. After all, right now they need to start cooking the most complex dish imaginable. Not understanding what was going on, the spirit did not argue with the boy, and prepared all the necessary ingredients. Immediately after this, the cooking process began, and with deft movements of his hands, Tin expertly cut the necessary ingredients. And grabbing the sharpest knife in the 3 worlds, he continued cooking, and did it skillfully, which brought him even more pleasure. Using his magical abilities and sparing no effort, he brought the job to the end and tried to make the dish the most delicious in the world. His friends could not believe their eyes, because in just a few days the insecure Tin turned into a legendary chef. A few minutes later, the hero exclaimed that the problem had been solved and the dish was ready. Some time later, events continued to occur at Tao's house, where Tai was invited to a tasting of the dish. Looking at this dish, the servants were amazed, because they did not understand how such a simple dish could be tasty. Even Tai himself did not believe that this was a real dish of divine dishes. Smiling, the guy admitted that this was really not entirely true. Tai clearly did not like what he heard, and he exclaimed that he would not tolerate being deceived. As a dragon chef, he was unable to fulfill the immortal's order and failed the test, which is why he will face the wrath of the Jade Emperor. This turn of events caused strong feelings among the protagonist's friends, and they stood silently, waiting for what would happen next. The smart guy knew how to interest the scoundrel. I began to talk about cancer of the purest soul, because it is the creation of heaven and earth, the most valuable ingredient, the flesh of which is crystal white, smooth and tasty. Using crayfish of the purest soul in a dish should preserve the taste of all ingredients as much as possible. Slow cooking the crayfish with various seasonings can give excellent results, but it will lose its authentic flavor. This really interested Tai, and he decided to listen to the end before leaving. Continuing his story, the hero mentioned that crayfish live in a very cold abyss, so their flesh is so hard that it is difficult to chew. That's why simmering it slowly with lots of spices is the best way to cook this meat and soften its texture. Even the insolent bodyguards admitted that this boy really knows a lot. Tai exclaimed that the guy should understand this himself, because this is the only way to preserve the taste in a dish for 1,000 years. But in fact, according to the main character, this was not entirely true. The reaction was immediate and everyone was shocked that the guy disagreed with Tae. Friends were also dumbfounded by this turn of events, and did not understand why he contradicted his own words. An enraged Tae turned around to listen to the guy who intrigued him so much. The angry man called the young man an upstart, because he thinks that he will surpass the greatest dragon cook. Closing his eyes, the guy explained that he certainly did not think that he would surpass the greatest chef. But the development of culinary art involves innovation and discovery. The first ever dish of this crayfish from the dragon chef was an unprecedented creation, but this is not the only way to prepare it. Indeed, in his hometown, in order to preserve the freshness and tenderness of fish and crayfish for as long as possible, a unique cooking method was created, which also preserves the beneficial properties of these ingredients. And in the city of the protagonist they call this method shredding. This term means that on the one hand, finely chopped meat, and on the other, fresh meat, together they produce fresh, finely chopped meat that can be eaten. Since ancient times to this day, real delicacies have been created using this method, and countless people around the world believe that this is the best way to prepare seafood. Therefore, his dish today is not a crayfish stew of the purest soul. After which, the boy began to reach for the plate, where the new dish was located. Having opened it, everyone was shocked by what they saw, because no one expected to see a crayfish with such a presentation. Because it was shredded cancer of the purest soul. The exquisite dish impressed with its presentation and surprised with the bold decision on the part of the chef. The created dish truly looked like a beautiful landscape and created an incredible experience. Looking at this dish, everyone began to have tears in their eyes, because the masterpiece of food was incredibly beautiful. The petals in this dish were made from crayfish meat. Crayfish meat is tough only if it is cut thickly, but the thin pieces are soft and tender. Tin cut the crayfish into 3,600 thin slices to ensure that each petal was tender, smooth, crispy and melt in your mouth. Crayfish meat has a cool aura, thanks to which it remains fresh for a long time. Even Tae admitted that this meat is indeed very tender, but it should not be eaten without anything because the cold aura is too strong. That's why Ting decided to add fire flower petals from Tao's house to neutralize the temperature. The two leaves have been cut into minute patterns, yet they are not separated but form a flower. But that was actually not all. The stream next to the carved tree is a special sauce for meat of the purest soul. It gives the light meat a richer taste. You should first dip the delicious meat in the sauce of the purest soul. Coming closer, Tin decided to ask Taya if he wanted to eat this delicious piece. It was really very difficult for the man to restrain himself. He was literally drooling from his mouth. Continuing to put pressure on the villain, the hero explained that he had not prepared a stew from the cancer of the purest soul, and therefore asked if he agreed to judge this dish. The scoundrel immediately asked not to worry, because he, the great Tai, swears that if this dish is really tasty, he will not do anything bad to them. Even Josie confirmed that there is no need to worry because immortals are true to their taste buds, especially since there are many eyewitnesses here. Wishing Taya a bon appetit, he began to try the same legendary dish that had recently been created. Taking the most delicate piece of cancer into his mouth with the help of chopsticks, the impudent man began to gradually taste it. As soon as he chewed it, an incredibly rich taste arose in his mouth, which amazed with its delicacy. The servants were even alarmed, because they saw that something was wrong with the master, which is why they asked if he was all right. Tai still continued to remain silent, and the guards were really worried, because they thought that the gentleman was ill. Suddenly, it was as if there was an explosion of tastes that amazed absolutely everyone who was present in this room. The scoundrel who had previously made threats could not resist eating such a delicious crayfish. The guards even shouted at the gentleman to eat slowly, otherwise he might choke. Due to the fact that the gentleman was silent, the men also decided to help him and try this dish. Watching the eating of this dish, Tin realized that the old man had simply never seen real food before. Just a few seconds later, the plate was completely empty, no longer containing one of the most delicious dishes Tai had ever tasted. Their appearance made them shiver from the cold, because they had absolutely no manners, and they overate so much that they were literally smeared in food. Suddenly, the girl decided to go up to the gentleman to ask him something. Josie wanted to know what Tai thought about whether Ting had the right to be a dragon chef. After thinking a little, the man exclaimed that he would still think about this question. This really started to anger the goddess, because she knew that this old man was very treacherous. After all, what he really wanted was pure soul crayfish stew, but Ting prepared chopped pure soul crayfish, which is not what he asked for. Even the spirit got angry, because he couldn't even imagine what this freak was planning again. However, this dish was great, the knife worked, the shape was perfect, but there was too little food. Tai was afraid that he ate everything too quickly and did not taste it. Winking at the man, the hero immediately realized that, to put it bluntly, he simply couldn't get enough of him. The guards also exclaimed that the portions are very small, and it is no less possible to fill up. Their master will never admit that he is a snaggle-toothed slave. Unable to bear such behavior from men, Tai began to act. Having grabbed 2 guards, he exclaimed that he would send these gluttons to catch crayfish, and ask the dragon cook to prepare this delicious dish. Smiling, the guy decided to explain to the scoundrel that this was not a problem, and in Tao's house there were a lot of crayfish of the purest soul. The smart boy decided to ask the spirit to show the guests their royal garden. Thanks to them, they were able to purchase a lot of crayfish from the eggs they found in their crayfish. The spectacle was truly impressive, because the men could not even imagine that so many crayfish would be introduced into their river. The enterprising hero also exclaimed that they could eat all these crayfish. An unlimited supply of shredded crayfish only in the Tao house, for a reasonable price, of course. 1 cancer of the purest soul will cost 100 crystals. For the rich man, this was not a problem, and he brought a chest with many crystals, with which he was going to repay for the food. As soon as the chest began to open, an incredibly bright light could be seen from it, because there was a huge amount of crystals there. This sight was truly amazing for the owners of the Tao house, because thanks to such clients, with such reserves of crystals, they can become rich. Some time later, Tai declared that Ting was officially worthy of being a dragon chef. Josie traveled through the human world for 100 years to find the dragon cook and return him to his place, which is why the man wanted to inform the Jade Emperor about this now. And Tai was going to tell his cook to make dumplings from crayfish. Everyone was very happy that Ting had finally officially become a dragon chef. The spirit cried with happiness, because he was very glad that his Tao house was finally growing. The goddess was also very happy because the dragon cook had finally found his place and Tao's house was finally opening. The main character himself was also very glad that now he really is a dragon cook. Meanwhile, events continued to happen in the real world. The grandfather sat alone, and realized that more than 10 days had already passed, and wanted to find out where his grandson was now. Because before, a portal appeared, from which the hero began to scream and call for his grandfather. The old man even thought that perhaps his old eyes were deceiving him, and he did not see his grandson. Suddenly, the portal began to appear again, from which the beloved grandson was supposed to appear. The silhouette of a certain person was visible in the portal, and with every second it became closer. The elderly man continued to watch the portal and was surprised at such a rare phenomenon. It was indeed Tin who returned from the heavenly world to the human world. Hong was indeed very happy that his grandson had finally returned and visited him. Shedding a stingy manly tear, the boy exclaimed that he missed his grandfather very much. Tin decided to tell his grandfather about what happened to him, and in the end he added that now his grandson is a real dragon cook. This meant that the legend of the ancestors was true, and the knife had a great origin. This time baby Tina was blessed by the gods, and the grandfather wanted to go and burn incense. Smiling because of such a statement, the hero asked his grandfather not to worry, and asked him to taste a delicacy from another world. He brought it here to thank Hong. It is believed that this food fills the body with strength, and he is not in very good health, which is why he should feel better with a few bites. The work with the knife was really good, the presentation and serving were also appropriate, but the shape of the piece was not ideal. In any case, grandfather wanted to try what this dish tasted like. Taking one piece of cancer, grandfather gradually began to chew it. The boy decided to ask his grandfather if he liked such an unusual dish. For an older man it was really quite impressive. The crawfish was crispy, sweet, cold and refreshing, and that leaf cut through the extra cold perfectly. Suddenly, something strange began to happen to Hong, as he had an extremely strange feeling. He immediately threw down his chopsticks because he felt very bad. It was really strange for the grandson, because his grandfather had never behaved like this before. It was as if something began to happen to him, and some kind of transformation began, which clearly had a negative effect on him. The alarmed guy was afraid for the life of his grandfather and wanted to find out what was happening to him. Things were clearly not all right with Grandpa, because the color of his face changed dramatically and his gaze literally became blank. The man abruptly stood up from the chair he was sitting on and was breathing very heavily, thereby frightening his grandson. The sight was indeed very creepy, and Tin feared for the life of his grandfather. Suddenly, the man's gaze suddenly shifted back, and he hit with all his might the expensive pots that stood nearby, and thereby smashed them to pieces. As it turned out, it was his precious teapot made of Yasinski clay, which he had kept for decades. At that same second, a rat nearby began to offend, who was very frightened because the kettle was broken. Jumping onto the shelf, the rat began to hide behind pots of preserved food. The elderly man clearly did not like this and was angry at the rat, which ran away cowardly. The frightened guy began to stop his grandfather, because not far from him there was a vessel that they had inherited from their ancestors. But it seems that Mo Hong didn't care at all, and he continued to destroy everything that was in his way. With just one incredibly powerful blow, all the pots that were on the shelf began to fall to the floor. The guy continued to watch everything that was happening, and did not understand at all what was happening here. Suddenly, the grandfather turned around and began to look carefully at his grandson. After which, he immediately turned his gaze upward, looking at the picture that was nearby. In fact, he was watching a spider that was hanging not far from that very painting. Laughing, the distraught grandfather began to attack the insect again. The grandson literally began to beg his grandfather. They said that this was too much, and they should not touch at least the portraits of their ancestors. Angry, the elderly man shouted to be let go. Taking out his fist, he began to use his abilities to fight back. The distraught Mo Hong began to attack his grandson, and did not even think that this was his relative. Feeling incredible powerlessness, Tin only begged for his grandfather to finally wake up. Unexpectedly, a portal appeared not far from the scene of events. At that very second, someone began to use magical powers on grandfather. It turned out that it was Josie who decided to help in such a difficult situation. Turning to the guy, she decided to find out what he had done here. Some time later, events continued to occur at the Mo family's home. The caring spirit began to help his grandfather, because thanks to Josie he should get better. Meanwhile, Josie was screaming at the hero because she was perplexed by what he had done. The goddess was very angry because the dragon's cook stole the crayfish of the purest soul and fed it to his grandfather. The guy, who did not understand anything, could not even understand why they were shouting at him, because he just wanted to thank him in this way. This answer only confused the girl, but she decided to explain that people and immortals have different organisms. Where did he even come from, that people can eat divine food? Feeling guilty, Ting did not want to admit what he had done, and only asked whether Josie really spared food for his grandfather. In fact, this is not what the goddess meant, and the spirit explained that the heavenly ingredients absorb divine energy that does not exist in the earthly world. If a mortal cannot digest the divine dish, serious problems may arise. And the boy, in turn, is the dragon's cook, so he became a half-divine being, and this does not concern him. What can't be said about the old man, even at his age, for him one bite of this dish feels like 100 ginseng roots at a time. Feeling guilty, the guy nevertheless exclaimed that he understood everything and was really guilty. It's still good that the goddess managed to help, otherwise the situation could have been even worse. Bowing down, the hero began to apologize, saying that it was his fault, and also thanked his friends for helping his grandfather. Suddenly, Ting decided to look at his grandfather, because he wanted to know how he was feeling. But it turned out that he was not in the room at all, and the window in the room was open. Inspired, the grandfather began to run after the cats and scare them, because he was full of energy. The excited guy started shouting to his grandfather to come down quickly. It turned out that Josie forgot to cast the spell while she was talking with the guy. The next morning, the event continued again at the Mo family's house. Everyone was very happy that grandfather had finally woken up. The elderly man began to get out of bed to understand his well-being. It was actually very easy for him to get up, and he felt incredibly light. Grandfather literally felt that he was now a pretty strong man. The joyful grandson also saw that his grandfather really seemed to look younger. Suddenly, the grandfather hit his grandson right on the head with all his strength with a stick. After all, his grandson doesn't dare to say that, and if it weren't for that girl, Ting would have killed him, and he just destroyed the precious true clay teapot and their family vessel. Some time later, events continued to occur at the Mo family's home. The old man became depressed because he could not find words to describe the pain and humiliation he felt when he realized that he had destroyed family heirlooms. Suddenly, someone exclaimed that the old man should not kill himself like that. After all, Josie made him happy, saying that all these items were very easy to repair. Using her magical abilities, the girl began to work miracles, and she instantly repaired all the relics that had been mercilessly broken earlier. Each of the containers that were destroyed was instantly restored. The Mo family was truly happy, and Grandpa couldn't believe his eyes. Although Mo Ting acted like a fool, his grandfather's body survived, and he became stronger than before. Feeling happy, Mo Hong thanked the immortals for correcting his grandson's mistake and saving his life. The Mo family must now thank them for their virtue. It turned out that they actually came here, firstly, to save Mo, secondly, so that grandfather would teach Ting his skills, and thirdly, they wanted to look at earthly cuisine to diversify their menu. Realizing the importance of this mission, Mo Hong exclaimed that he would not upset the immortals, because they, people, would not lose face in front of the gods. Meanwhile, the boy decided to tell his grandfather that it turns out that the gods don't know how to cook at all. In all three worlds, the gods either eat raw food while hunting for it, or they cry and eat stale bread from the offering, and the hungriest ones can't even walk away from the wind, because they can't cook anything for themselves. His less than ideal chopping of the cancer made even Taya's mouth water. The worried grandfather was alarmed by this statement and wanted to know if it was really true. The goddess confirmed that this is indeed the case. The world of immortals is impressive, but has no culinary talents at all, so they choose an ordinary person to be the dragon's cook. And right now this title is held by Mo Ting, the grandson of Mo Hong. Calling on the sharpest knife, the grandson wanted to show how much control he had with his knife. Having thrown an orange, the boy decided to act and portray culinary art. After making many cuts on the orange, Tin had to reproduce a culinary masterpiece. And as soon as the orange fell, its peel instantly disintegrated, like a magic flower. All this time, the grandfather watched what was happening, and saw that his grandson was very good at controlling his hands, and now the Mo family really has a full-fledged heir. The elderly man also decided to please the immortals, and exclaimed that he would prepare the Mo family's heirloom dishes for them with his own hands. The grandfather, along with the immortals, immediately began to leave, and the grandson was alarmed, because he was not invited. Turning around, Mo Hong shouted that Ting was now the dragon's cook, and he needed to cut the apple into 4 parts, cut each into another 3,000 slices. One portion needed to be cut into cubes the size of a grain of rice, the other should be crushed so that each piece could pass through eye of a needle, the third portion must be cut into strips. The slices must be of the same thickness. If there is even one flaw, then you must start over. In addition, none of the slices should be dented or broken. This is exactly what the hero demanded from the workers, and now that his hands are healed, he needs to fulfill his requests yourself. Smiling, the grandson understood his fate and the task that his grandfather had given him. Letting the man's stingy tears fall, he saluted his grandfather, because now it was his turn to do this work. Some time later, events continued to occur in the restaurant where Mo Hong prepared family dishes. The immortals immediately ate each of the dishes, and realized that it was really very tasty. Grandpa's food was simply excellent, and the Jiuzis recognized this with spirit. Mo Hong also felt very good, because he ate the same piece of crayfish that Mo Ting kindly gave him. The spirit admitted that the old man's food is really tasty, but it lacks the divine aura. It is much healthier for them to eat the food of immortals. That's why they brought the crayfish of the purest soul, and it would be great if Mo Hong cooked it. The goddess instantly reacted to the fact that Po was stealing food, and for this he should get what he deserved. A little embarrassed, but admitting his guilt, the spirit asked if Josie wanted to taste the cancer of the purest soul. Having released the spirit, the girl admitted that she really would like to, but only just a little. The elderly man literally beamed with happiness and exclaimed that if his guests wanted it, he could easily prepare this dish. But as soon as Mo Hong started cooking, his knife immediately broke because this crayfish was really strong. Suddenly, very loud laughter was heard nearby, because someone saw such an absurd situation. It was Tin who laughed at his grandfather because it was the food of the gods and could not be cut with an ordinary knife, which makes it necessary to use the sharpest knife in the world to cut such hard food. Indignant, the elderly man decided to ask his grandson what he was doing here, because he was told to practice with a knife. Smiling, the boy explained that grandfather should not worry, because he had completed this task. The elderly man did not immediately believe what he heard, because it was impossible so quickly. He used to make concessions to his grandson and allowed him a lot, but if he lies, then the grandfather will be very angry. A little embarrassed, the boy explained that he really wasn't lying. If his grandfather didn't believe him, he could see for himself. Mo Hong still did not believe that this was possible, and decided to go to see for himself. On the table there were several plates containing an apple, cut according to the requirements of the task. To make sure that the task was completed correctly, grandfather decided to do something. Grabbing many pieces of apple, he began tossing them into the water to test how thin they were. What the immortals saw was truly impressive, because no one had been able to repeat something like this before. The slices were so thin that even in water they seemed transparent, like small jellyfish. The next test was the incredibly thin apple thread, and it successfully passed through the eye of the needle. Thereby the next task was also completed. The shocked grandfather admitted that his grandson's knife skills are truly perfect. The grandfather even cried with happiness and wanted to ask his grandson how he did it. It was thanks to hard training that he succeeded, because it was known that no one else was capable of it. Bowing his head, Mo Hong asked his grandson to cut cancer into threads. For the boy this was not a problem at all, and he wanted grandfather to teach him further. In fact, the meat itself has a unique taste. It can be cooked well much easier, without the use of spices. For example, this soup is prepared with non-chicken broth, cooked over low heat, and it turns out very tasty. But the pieces of meat should not be too thin, otherwise they will not be suitable for this dish. What happened next was truly impressive. Without taking his eyes off, the hero and his comrades watched his grandfather cook. Just a little salt, both the soup and the meat have a unique taste and melt in your mouth. Now it can be called cancer soup of the purest soul. The embarrassed boy immediately took the bowl of soup into his hands to take a closer look at it. With the slightest movement the pieces of meat swirl like a cloud. This is a simple yet sophisticated return to basics. This method of cooking is unique and Grandpa really doesn't give up. The gods and demigods decided to try the soup to evaluate its true taste. As soon as they tried the whole soup, they wanted to eat the whole plate at once, because this dish was very tasty. At this behavior on the part of the gods, Grandfather only laughed, because he was glad that they really liked this dish. In fact, there are many ways to cook meat in China, namely deep frying, pan frying, steaming, stewing, boiling, freezing, baking and more. Turning to his grandson, the grandfather exclaimed that he would teach little Tin everything that he could do. The main character was really grateful to his grandfather for such instructions and help in learning. Some time later, events continued to occur late in the evening. Speaking to his grandson, the grandfather said that he could not even dream that he would be able to cook. Instructing his grandson, Mo Hong asked him to do the right thing and take advantage of all opportunities, because then he would be sure that he would become an excellent cook. The joyful guy asked his grandfather not to worry, because he would be visiting him, so he should not worry. But on the other hand, he was also going to visit the Huang family, because he needed to return to them the humiliation that they had experienced. Having laughed, the grandfather did not expect that his grandson was still offended by this family. Turning around, Mo Hong decided to ask little Ting if he remembered how their Mo family cooked. After thinking a little, the guy suggested that the Mo family cooked perfectly, unforgettably, for guests. They are masters who put their soul into every dish. The main thing for them is honesty and virtue. Lies and deceit will never bring true glory. Their family is kind to every guest, and with the highest skill they are ready to satisfy their hunger. In ancient times, when people struggled to survive, especially when food was scarce, they found ways to make inedible things edible, turning something terrible tasting into something wonderful. This is the pinnacle of culinary art. From then until these days, thanks to the efforts of culinary experts, the number of ingredients available to people has grown from several tens to hundreds of thousands. With the rise of these ingredients, many cooking methods were discovered. And cooking is what makes people live and rejoice. Then the grandfather decided to hit his grandson, because it seems that he did not understand the most important thing. Because Tin wants to become famous as a chef who used his skills for revenge, and it is unknown if he truly values cooking. Leaving the house, Mo Hong asked his grandson to think about it, because the desire for revenge should not interfere with cooking. The slightly embarrassed guy began to think about what his grandfather wanted to tell him. Suddenly the door opened, and Josie and the spirit entered it, because they were looking for Mo Ting. It turned out that they had not been here for a long time, and she had heard that there was a lot of delicious food here, which is why the girl asked to show all the food that was there. For the hero it was really strange, because the grandfather had prepared a whole feast for them, and they still hadn't eaten enough, as if they could fit many kilograms of food into them. In fact, immortals can eat 100 times more than ordinary people and demigods. Some time later, events continued to occur in one of the cafes in China, where dear friends were contacted. They say that the dish in this cafe is prepared with natural butter. Lots of kebab skewers were just prepared for them. There was also fresh soup in the bowls, which you could also take and taste. The huge amount of food was impressive in the scale of preparation, as if a feast had been created for only a few people. But unfortunately, the main character had to pay for all this, and the payment amount was 4,444 yen. Although even such a large amount of food was not enough for the gods, and they wanted even more. The hero was already literally begging for them to stop eating, because now they would burst because of this, and a crowd of people had also gathered nearby to watch an ordinary girl eat kilograms of food. After some time, they still left this cafe, but the girl could not even walk quickly, because she wanted to enjoy the aftertaste of the food. Suddenly, someone nearby exclaimed that you need to get in line for an entry number. The line into the huge restaurant was incredible, because all dishes were 50% off and many people wanted to eat there. Joyful Josie asked the boy to go to this restaurant, because there are a lot of people there, and probably the food there is very tasty, but the hero was against it and wanted to go home. This answer angered the goddess very much, because in fact, she healed his hands, but did not receive gratitude in return. Suddenly, someone nearby saw the same heir of the Mo family being beaten by some girl. Today will be the opening of the Huang family restaurant with a banquet for all guests, and it will be a great honor to treat the Mo family. Confused, the hero immediately discovered his enemy, who was standing nearby. With an angry look, the guy decided to look at his enemy from the Huang family. The scoundrel felt very self-confident, and calmly looked at Tin as if he were his friend. Tin immediately began to remember the events that happened earlier, and held a strong grudge against this scoundrel. But Huang Tian didn't care about this, and he asked if the hero was afraid to come to his restaurant. Turning his back, the guy explained that courage had nothing to do with it, and he simply didn't want to have anything to do with his family. The impudent man turned to the guy again and asked how the Mo family remained the leading culinary dynasty in Izhou for hundreds of years when there were such cowards there. Unable to bear such an insult, Ting asked to repeat it, and said that in that case he would appreciate the level of his family's dishes. In fact, the impudent guy wanted this and deliberately provoked the main character. There were impressively sized statues outside the restaurant, and all the customers were thanked for coming to the Huang family's restaurant today. The creator of the restaurant chain is Mr. Huang, originally from Izhou, although they have branches all over the world. But this is the first restaurant that was opened in our native land. For over 100 years, the Huang family has been perfecting Sichuan cuisine. The heavy salt and butter of traditional Sichuan cuisine is no longer in keeping with their times. That's why the Huang family introduced a number of new dishes, which, incorporating some Western styles of cuisine, were well received by many of their guests. Huang is also the only Chinese restaurant with 3 Michelin stars, and they hope they can bring a new flavor to the weekend city. Having opened all the dishes, there was an incredibly huge number of them, and each of them was striking in its appearance. It was truly amazing for people, because every dish looked like a real work of art. Huang Tian knew that neither the hero nor the girl standing next to him had ever eaten one of these dishes before. Also, the scoundrel added that the Mo family lives in Izhou and has a limited understanding of the world, although the Huang family has not been here for 100 years, but while traveling around the world, he has created many of his own special recipes, so you should try these dishes and see for yourself. For the main character, such behavior was unacceptable, because his opponent talked too much. Josie really wanted to eat, and could no longer restrain herself, and Ting now didn't understand whose side she was on, because he was their enemy, and they couldn't eat his food. Their enmity did not bother the girl at all, because the guy was just being mocked by someone, and was he really so spineless as not to try the dishes? Finally, it was announced that all guests were invited to taste the delicious dishes. The joyful guests began to try the food, and each took a piece for himself to leave room in his stomach for other food. Suddenly, all the food that was on the guests' table and on their forks suddenly disappeared. Literally in an instant, food from all over the table suddenly disappeared, and it was nowhere to be found. Although no one understood what happened, Josie managed to eat everything in a few seconds, after which she asked for more. People were very angry with the girl, because they didn't understand where she came from. She literally scared all the people to death, and no one understood what had happened here. Even Huang Tian couldn't understand why he brought them here in the first place. If only he had known that this would happen, the opening would not have been disrupted. At that very second, the hero decided to act and grabbed the girl to save her. Fearing the consequences, Tin ordered the girl to run away from here so that they would not be beaten. But as soon as he started running, he immediately crashed his head into someone. Such a strong blow even caused dizziness, due to which Tin sat on the floor for several minutes. It turned out that it was the head of the Huang family, and he understood that Ting came here to ruin everything, and disrupted his opening ceremony, and now wants to sneak away. The angry guy immediately noticed the scoundrel who was standing in front of him. Having started to make excuses, the hero literally shouted that he was not to blame, and it was his son who invited them here. They themselves arranged a banquet, and everyone should eat as much as they want. Today they really opened, so, of course, they invited everyone, but are they really guests? Looking straight into the eyes of the impudent man, Tin did not understand what he meant. The man decided to turn to people, because he thought that everyone was very curious about who this young man was. Then he explained that this boy is the heir of the Mo family. As they all know, some time ago the Huang family and the Mo family fought for this restaurant, and the heir of the Mo family refused the culinary duel, which is why the Huang family won fairly. Today was supposed to be the opening ceremony of Huang restaurant, and in order to thank all the guests, the restaurant prepared this banquet, but it was not expected that the Mo family would take it so badly that they would send two angry guests here who, like mad pigs, ate everything his way, only to ruin their banquet. The people around also agreed with the man, because they believed that the Mo family really behaved unworthily after their loss. Other people started commenting that this girl looked like she hadn't eaten in years. And in general, such behavior is unacceptable, and it's probably a shame to communicate with such people. It's even possible that Miss was a pig in the past, and those who act like that are ignorant, and you shouldn't bring a dog to such a place at all. Unable to bear these insults, the guy began to get up from the floor, and he looked the scoundrel straight in the eyes, because what happened today had nothing to do with the Mo family, and his girlfriend did not want to offend them, because it was his request. Also, this act is not a crime, and one cannot be punished for it. The man objected to this, because after all, Mo and Huang are excellent cooks in the family, and he will not get angry and call the police. In that case, they can forget this incident, because he has a solution that he should have gotten used to by now. Namely, the solution was that the main character needed to kneel down and apologize. The stunned guy was extremely angry with the scoundrel that he dared to offer him a solution to the conflict in this way. Suddenly, someone behind you called out to Tin, stopping him. This was a girl who started walking forward because she wanted to do something. Josie continued to walk forward resolutely, and it was unknown what she wanted to do in this situation. One of her eyes began to glow bright blue, as if she was about to use her magical powers. Then she decided to ask the insolent man whether he really dared to order the dragon cook of their heavenly world to kneel down. Mr. Huang had not heard of the dragon cook, and he wanted to ask the girl if this brat had betrayed her too, because he should kneel down. This breed of dog is quite rare, probably this is its amulet, the man said, thinking that the spirit is a dog. Things were really very bad, and the spirit, together with Josie, wanted to destroy absolutely everything here. Unable to bear it, Pa shouted that this old man was definitely looking for death here. All the people were shocked that this dog was talking, and no one could understand what kind of creature it really was. The worried hero tried to calm them down, persuading them to stop. But there was no stopping them, and the spirit and the girl began to use their magical abilities to pacify the villains. The wrath of the gods fell on ordinary people, punishing them for their insolence. A column of bright light was visible throughout the city, which was recreated due to the use of magical abilities. After just one explosion, at the moment of using magic, the entire building was completely destroyed. Several concrete slabs fell on the main character, but he miraculously survived this situation. Looking around, he saw absolutely no one around him, because only the fog that was left as a result of the explosion was visible. Suddenly, someone shouted that it seemed that the old man needed a talisman. Someone thought to cook something tasty out of the old man, because he still wasn't full. It turned out that it was a giant beast, in the form of a huge monster, which recreated this explosion. The huge creature approached the impudent man and began to sniff him. At that very moment, Josie exclaimed that they were too proud and insignificant and did not see the true power of the dragon cook, and for this she was obliged to punish them. Using her divine power, the girl decided that this kind of punishment should really be inflicted on the scoundrel who dared to insult the dragon cook. Wishing the insolent people death, the goddess called upon lightning, which literally hovered in the air, and wanted to destroy the pathetic people. Concerned and frightened people in fear begged for mercy, because they hoped that the goddess would not touch them in this way. Even Juan began to cry and begged not to be killed. Unexpectedly, the hero decided to stop everything that was happening here and grabbed the girl. After which, he exclaimed that this was his problem, and he would sort it out himself. The goddess was against this, because she was not going to tolerate such an attitude towards herself. Having hit the demigod with all her might, the girl wanted to continue punishing the pathetic people. Realizing the complexity of the situation, the hero ran up again and asked Josie to stop, because they are ordinary people and you can't kill them. The distraught goddess ordered him to shut up and not even try to stop her. With the last of his strength, the guy shouted with all his might that they could now go home and have a tasty meal. Hearing this, the girl's mood instantly began to change. Her eyes also changed their color to the usual color that she had in her normal appearance. The benevolent Josie agreed to leave here only if she would eat at home as much as she wanted. Sighing with relief, the guy exclaimed that they had agreed, they should better go home now. That is why the goddess decided to spare these people, but this all happened only thanks to the dragon's cook. Starting to teleport, Josie asked Ting to return quickly, because she was already waiting for his wonderful dishes. All the people began to think that it was an evil demon, like some kind of magical creature, and it seems that Ting was somehow related to this girl. The sad restaurant owner Juan continued to look at the main character, and did not even know what to say to him. The smart guy continued to look at the scoundrel and told him that today's commotion was over. But as a bonus, Ting wanted to prove that he was capable of fighting. Taking a cucumber out of his pocket, he wanted to show his true culinary abilities in practice. And with the help of his sharpest knife in the world, he wanted to do the unthinkable, which no man could do. Many cuts were made on one vegetable that was floating in the air, and as soon as it fell on the plate, a miracle was about to happen. After saying goodbye, Ting said after him that they would see the Huang family again. As soon as Huang Tian touched the cucumber, he expected what would happen to him. The unthinkable happened. A cucumber that looked whole literally turned into small strings that hovered in the air. In the blink of an eye, he created these threads that fluttered in the wind. This was the style of the Mo family, and none of his contemporaries can do something like this, because it is a magnificent work. Some time later, events continued to occur after returning, and it was unknown how much more food would fit into the goddess and her spirit. Meanwhile, events continued at the Mo family home. The grandfather scolded the hero for not taking revenge professionally, and now he can't consider himself a dragon chef after what I did in that restaurant. Grandfather tried to defend Ting, saying that he was not to blame for this, and this vile family did not dare to blame the spirit for eating all the food. This was indeed the case, and if it weren't for Mo Ting, the Huang family would not have gotten off so easily. Laughing, the elderly man turned to the dear immortals, because this brat is guilty, and they do not have to justify him and protect him. Mo Hong understood his dissatisfaction, and that he held a strong grudge against the Huang family. They really did wrong, but with such an attitude, he would not be able to reveal himself as a true specialist. The grandson sincerely did not understand why he could not do this, and wanted to find out what was the matter. Then my grandfather decided to ask him if he knew the origin of Sichuan cuisine. Previously, such a concept did not exist at all, but the emergence of Sichuan chefs combined the characteristics of various cuisines of the north, south, east and west into one whole, resulting in Sichuan cuisine having about 100 flavors in a single dish. These are people who studied with many masters, humbly adopted others' experiences and did not argue. Without their work, Sichuan cuisine would never have existed. Researchers wonder how cancer could end up in Sichuan dishes if their chefs had not studied with professionals in Shanghainese and Cantonese cuisine. And although he had serious problems with his hands, he read all the family books and learned to cook on his own every day. But we must not so quickly forget about the pride and long history of the foundations of the Mo family, because building on the experience of our ancestors is the way of the chef. In that case, a guy doesn't deserve to be a Sichuan chef unless he's willing to give up everything for it. As for the Huang family, he is only driven by resentment and desire for revenge, and he has not even tried to evaluate them at the kitchen level. Turning around, the old man also exclaimed that, to be honest, he was disappointed in his grandson. This turn of events really upset the protagonist's comrades, and the guy himself understood that his grandfather was right. In those days when he didn't know how to cook, dreams of a kitchen were all he had. But after his hands recovered, he stopped treating cooking as something sacred. It became a common practical skill. The upset guy began to think about how he could get out of such a difficult situation and cope. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. It turned out that some unexpected guest had come to their house. Looking through the door, Tin wanted to see who was behind that door. The uninvited guest addressed the hero by name and wanted the door to be opened for him. It turned out that it was Huang Tian who came to talk about something. Grandfather and the goddess were really very surprised by this, and they were wary of such an uninvited guest. The spirit immediately recognized the cub from the Huang family, and exclaimed that he had come here in vain, and now he would certainly be finished. Recalling the events of the past, Huang Tian was indeed very scared because he remembered the spirit that had transformed into a giant monster. In fact, feeling very awkward, the guy admitted that he was not here to quarrel, and he was just looking for Tin. Not trusting the guest, the guy asked him why he was looking for him. Feeling very awkward and lost from fear, one tried to explain why he came, but he couldn't do it right away. Unexpectedly, he fell to his knees and literally begged to be taught how to wield a knife, because he was ready to pay any price for it. Remembering his grandfather's words, Ting remembered that he didn't deserve to be a Sichuan chef if he wasn't willing to give up everything for it. Meanwhile, the spirit continued to be indignant because he had insulted them, and now he was asking for help. Turning around, the hero seemed to want to ask for advice from his loved ones, because he did not understand what to do. But grandfather and Josie were silent and did not want to answer his unspoken question. Tin decided to admit that he had relatively recently learned to handle a knife. Apologizing, Juan asked not to say anything more, because he already understood everything, and apologized to everyone. The upset guy began to leave, and did not say another word, because he felt guilty before such a master. Sighing heavily, the grandfather looked at his grandson and realized that perhaps he really was not worthy of being a chef of Sichuan cuisine. Suddenly, the hero exclaimed that this is why he believes that this skill belongs not only to him, but to every chef. That is why he said that if Huang Tian really wants it, then he can teach him. The relatives immediately reacted to this, and were really very happy that Tin made this decision. Even Huang Tian himself was very surprised by this, because he did not expect that such a great master would agree to teach him. Suddenly, at that very second, Josie's medallion, which was hanging around her neck, began to glow. It turned out that it was a contract that had just arrived to her by magic. It indicated that Baihua would soon bloom in the Jade Garden, so that the dragon cook would use it as ingredients for a dish for the goddess Suwanmu. The concerned goddess immediately exclaimed that the dragon cook had a very important client waiting for him, and it was necessary to move to Tao's house as soon as possible. Having recreated the magic portal, Josie was about to transfer the dragon and spirit cook to prepare for the celebration. Without hesitation, the guy also began to pack his things in order to move to the heavenly kingdom. Unfortunately, there was no time to explain why there was such a rush, and the girl began to literally drag the guy in order to move as quickly as possible. The former enemy watched all this and was extremely surprised that something like this was even possible. Taking one last look at Huang Tian, Ting promised to train him as soon as he figured out what was going on, and he shouldn't think that he would just forget about his family. After which, the portal instantly closed, and the hero and his comrades are now. The sight was truly shocking, and the guy could not understand what had happened. But he also knew that he would definitely wait for Ting, and regardless of the cost of training, he would still learn this technique. Some time later, events continued to happen in the Heavenly Kingdom, because every 100 years, Baihua blooms in the Jade Pond. The previous dragon cook prepared a delicacy of 100 flowers, and Sivanmu was very pleased. Sivanmu liked everything so much that she gave him a precious peach of immortality. This is the best gift in heaven and earth. This time, if he tries hard and Sivanmu is happy, then perhaps he will also receive some kind of gift. The boy immediately suggested that this peach of immortality could make the one who eats it immortal. But this was not so. In fact, it is impossible to become immortal, but with its help it is quite possible to prolong your life, avoid all diseases and strengthen the body as a whole. And most importantly, according to Josie, this peach is incredibly tasty. The hero really wasn't too happy about it, but he still wanted to create the perfect dish for Sivanmu. Suddenly, Po entered the room and was incredibly happy about something. He literally started jumping all over the room and destroying everything that was in his way. To pacify the spirit, the girl hit him in the face with all her might. Josie was furious because she didn't understand what was happening to the spirit, as if it had gone crazy. It turned out that the spirit wanted to tell that feminine chicken and shredded crayfish of the purest soul are in great demand. Moreover, they now have more than 10,000 crystals, which is a fortune. These words really inspired the girl, and she was incredibly happy, because previously they sat penniless for a very long time, and now they finally received money. They will never complain about poverty again, and will buy themselves whatever they want. Suddenly, the boy decided to remind him that with the help of these crystals it is necessary to update Tao's house. Instantly, the goddess was upset and did not want the crystals she had earned to be taken away from her, but this was irresponsible in the opinion of the main character, and they should earn much more after the update. Hearing about the higher earnings, Josie became inspired again and wanted to listen to the guy to the end. The nervous hero nevertheless decided to ask the spirit what they could now update in Tao's house. At the moment, they have 15,798 crystals at their disposal, which can be spent on upgrading the ballroom to a first-level suite, upgrading 2 separate rooms. 10 sets of dragon wood tables and chairs will add freshness to the interior and fill the room with the atmosphere of a fairy tale forest. An upgrade to the 1000 herb garden is also available, which will be needed for future cooking. But Ting really liked this proposal very much, and he wanted to improve the 1000 herb garden. The worried goddess did not understand what was wrong with the garden and why it should be improved. Turning around, the guy exclaimed that they should go, because if everything works out, they will earn a fortune. Some time later, events continued to occur in the magic garden. The comrades wandered through the magical forest in search of ingredients for new dishes. In the forest itself there was a huge amount of different living creatures, which were amazing in their appearance, and some animals even seemed very dangerous. Looking at the entire forest, the hero did not think that there were enough ingredients here to feed the entire heavenly world. But the spirit began to deny this, because it understood that a person cannot even imagine the potential of the Tao house. It is truly the most powerful artifact of the 3 worlds. Suddenly, a very bright light began to come from the hero's backpack. It was the dragon who began to ask the spirit what he said, and Po continued to make excuses, saying that the golden dragon was also very good at cooking. With this building, they are indeed very powerful. The Tao house took 3,000 years to create, and it is difficult to imagine, but still the whole house cannot compare with the golden dragon. Even the hero didn't believe it, because the golden dragon can only cut, and Tao's house has literally everything. This statement greatly outraged the dragon, because he knows nothing. The power of the artifact is connected with the abilities of their owners, and he does not even imagine how much it increases his culinary skills. Moreover, the heavenly feast is considered the highest aerobatics of cooking. Unexpectedly, the spirit decided to stop the golden dragon's statement and closed his mouth. Not understanding what the dragon was talking about, the hero decided to ask him again what this heavenly feast was. But his comrades remained silent and did not want to tell him what this heavenly feast really was. The slightly alarmed girl asked not to pay attention, and began to talk about the ingredients, that there was no need to worry, because the plants and animals from here can be used both in the heavenly world and in the world of demons and even people. There is enough of them for everyone. Looking down, the goddess decided to demonstrate one of the ingredients that was growing in the ground. Having snatched one of the ingredients, the hero was amazed at what happened next. Namely, as soon as the ingredient was torn out, it immediately began to be restored in the same place where it had previously grown. In just a few seconds, the plant that had just been pulled out was restored. For the hero it was truly real magic, and he could not believe that this could even happen. Having broken off one piece of the plant, he wanted to make sure whether it was really the same ingredient. It was really ginseng. If they sold it, they would become the richest in the world. In fact, it was not a rare plant, and anyone can buy it for nothing. Their world is full of more valuable things. If ginseng or something similar were more expensive, then Josie would have become rich long ago. The gods do not care about the preciousness of the ingredients, they only care about the taste, because immortals are indeed very superficial. Having dug a small hole, the guy decided to do something that no one had ever done before. This immediately aroused interest among the comrades, and they wanted to know what Tin was doing. Turning around, the hover smiled and said that he was planting seeds here. Alarmed, the girl wanted to find out what kind of seeds they were, and what he was up to again. Opening his backpack, the main character demonstrated the many varieties of seeds that he had with him. These were the seeds of spices and vegetables that he asked his grandfather to collect from the earth. Even though there are many different plants in this garden, there are still no earthly ingredients here, and without some of them it is impossible to prepare a good dish. But for some reason the seeds he planted don't grow so quickly. He had the same idea as the previous dragon chefs. In fact, many of the ingredients in the garden were of earthly origin, and some cultures have changed many times to adapt to the world. For example, wheat grew nearby, and it also changed to adapt to the conditions under heaven. What the hero saw next really amazed him, because he couldn't even imagine that wheat would look like this. The wheat was incredibly gigantic in size, and was not like what is grown on earth. The tomatoes also looked very huge, as if they were magnified 1,000 times. Broccoli was generally impressive in its size, and looked like trees that had been growing for 1,000 years. The chili pepper was even bigger, and literally grew to the skies. As Ting began to laugh madly, he realized that he was right, and with this, he would be able to cook real Chinese food at Taotia's house. The spirit immediately reassured him, saying that it was not so easy to make earthly plants survive in the heavenly world. The environment of the immortal world is different from the earthly one. It is extremely difficult to succeed in cultivation here, and only a few dozen dragon cooks have succeeded in this over the past 10 million years. If he succeeded with crayfish, this does not mean that he will be lucky here. Hearing this, the guy couldn't even imagine that the chance of growing something here was so small. As if nothing had happened, the friends began to leave, and at the last moment they told the hero that he had better start studying heavenly ingredients, because he definitely wouldn't be able to grow earthly ones here. Tin was really very upset by this fact, because he did not understand how he could prepare a dish without ingredients, and how he would grow something here, and also how he would know whether the seeds would take root on this land or not. Still, some chefs had succeeded at this in the past, and the guy couldn't believe he would have to give up. Observing the earth, he began to think about what he should do in order to grow an earthly plant. His head was filled with literally different thoughts, but he knew that he was a cook, but he did not understand why he needed to know how to grow vegetables. Suddenly, the dragon took out some fragrant flowers from the guy's bag. Starting to laugh, the golden dragon suggested that it seemed that his old man was not particularly attentive, and these were not seeds. In fact, it was a man. Thus, my grandfather planted it in his yard, as much as a whole tree. Suddenly, something occurred to the guy, because he remembered what happened earlier. Grabbing the dragon, Tin began to act because he realized something. The boy decided to order the dragon to turn into a knife. With a very devious expression on his face, he exclaimed that he had come up with something. Some time later, events continued to occur in Tao's house. A huge amount of food that was placed on the dining table was eaten. Josie had eaten too much and wanted to know if Ting was still in the garden, because this guy is very stubborn. Instantly her stomach evaporated somewhere, and she began to think that let the dragon cook do this, after which she decided to find out when the jade pond blooms. The jade pond was supposed to bloom in 3 or 4 days, but it was unknown whether Ting was ready. Suddenly, someone burst into the room, knocking down the door and going inside. It was the main character who had joy on his face. The tired, exhausted guy shouted that it worked and he was successful. The friends absolutely couldn't understand what was going on, because their friend looked like a complete crazy person. The dragon clearly didn't like this, and he called the spirit a psycho, and his entire family crazy. The golden dragon exclaimed that this child was a genius, and he couldn't believe it, but he actually succeeded. Joy really knew no bounds, and Tin was very happy that his plan had come to fruition. But literally a few seconds later, he fell from fatigue and exhaustion, because he spent a lot of time in the royal garden. A few hours later, the comrades came to look at the works of the main character, and were truly amazed. Because in a matter of days, he was able to grow a beautiful tree that had never been in the royal garden before. The smart guy wanted his friends to appreciate his work. The plant was truly impressive, and the friends continued to watch it without taking their eyes off it. The comrades were dumbfounded by such a plant, because they had never seen anything like it before. These were snow orchids. They add a wonderful scent to food and can be stored fresh or frozen. But on the other hand, the spirit also noticed something very interesting. There were yellow flowers there, but it was not clear what they were, because he had never heard of a tree on which 2 different flowers grow at once. The smell from them emanated incredible, which literally stroked the nose from the inside. The goddess decided to ask the dragon cook if he really did it. Without denying it, the guy immediately confirmed it. The flowers were so beautiful that I wanted to admire them all the time. The smell was very familiar, but Josie had never seen such flowers before. Continuing to praise himself, the boy asked if the girl was interested in how he achieved this. Josie began to get very angry that the hero was showing off. If he wanted to tell this, then he needed to do it now. The reason he wasn't happy with this garden was because it was impossible to cook a good dish without using many different spices. The 1,000-herb garden looks impressive, but to be honest, the herbs here are the same. The development of human cooking has always been accompanied by the discovery of new ingredients and spices: peppercorns, hot peppers, fresh oil, tobanjiang sauce, aged delicious wine, spices for flavor. These are all important parts of the dish. Without this variety, there is no point in even trying to do something, and in their world there are too few herbs. Since he was chosen as the dragon's cook, then he must prepare, accordingly, only the most delicious dishes. In any case, the goddess did not understand how this flower would help him with this. As he was told, the plants of the mortal world are incompatible with the immortal world, so they cannot be grown so easily here. Even on the ground, plants do not take root everywhere. They need certain soil and water, but there is another way. The comrades really wanted to know what method the hero came up with in order to grow plants here. Golden Dragon also worked here, so he is also great, and this method is really very unusual. Having turned the dragon into a knife, the boy continued to talk about the unusual method. And yet, he said that this method is called grafting. Not understanding anything, the goddess suggested that the vaccine was some kind of vaccination. In fact, grafting is a method of artificial propagation of plants by cuttings, that is, cutting a branch or bud from one plant and growing it onto a branch of another plant. 2 plants joined together grow into one, allowing the new plant to quickly adapt to its new environment and bear fruit. In any case, he didn't expect it to work, but he tried it anyway and didn't regret it, which is why he wanted to ask his friends if they knew what kind of flower it was. The taste and shape were similar to osmanthus, and the smell was the same, but still it was not it. The color and pattern were similar to a snow orchid. This statement was indeed true, because this is an osmanthus with the characteristics of a snow orchid, which means that earthly plants can not only take root in the heavenly kingdom, but also acquire new qualities. Well, if they complete Savanmu's task, she can give them that peach, and they will plant it here. The worried goddess thought that the dragon cook had gone crazy because the immortal peach is the embodiment of Queen Siwanmu's life force, not to mention that no one dares to plant it, and outside the jade pond, the peach never bears fruit, so it should save your life. Smiling, the guy said that this fruit can be grafted onto a fruit-bearing tree, then the fruits of the plant will be just like the peach of immortality. This really shocked the comrades even more, and they didn't even know how to react to it. Melon pear, campsis fruit, immortal peach, ears of wheat, and even the root of the heavenly weed, they are all in this garden, but they are different from the original. Perhaps the effect is worse, but they will be able to win in quantity, and they will be able to sell them. The reaction from the goddess came immediately, and she really didn't like what the guy was saying. The angry girl hit with all her might the insolent man who dared to contradict her. But it turned out that she was actually very happy, because their restaurant would also become the richest place, and Ting was truly a genius. Well, then he remembered that the goddess said that no one dared to plant the divine peach before, which could cause them problems. If so, then she will pay some scoundrels to work in Tao's house as bodyguards, and if they call her a glutton and want to kick her out, she will crush everyone to death with her crystals. Only the three of them will know about this plan, and if the information leaks out further, it will beat everyone to death. The joyful goddess exclaimed to the dragon's cook that he must prepare an excellent dish today, but if he dares to make a mistake, something terrible will happen. With just one blow, the immortal showed what could happen to the dragon's cook if he made a mistake. That same blow could have caused the tree to fall, and it literally shattered into small chips. The spectacle was indeed very frightening, and the guy did not want to make a mistake. Some time later, events continued to occur in Tao's house. The clever spirit read a book on agriculture to learn how to graft plants. The spirit remembered how the hero had previously told him that he had to learn several new dishes, so Po will have to take up gardening, and he goes to his world to get some books to him so that he can learn everything. As I continue to read, Po recalled how he agreed without any problems. Having shed a stingy tear of spirit, he realized that he had made a great mistake. Because there was a huge number of books, and they all needed to be studied. The divine spirit was literally surrounded by books. There were a lot of them, which contradicted what the main character had previously said. Meanwhile, events continued to happen in the kitchen, where Tin was exploring new dishes. Cutting off a small piece from an unknown vegetable, he decided to try it. With trembling hands, he brought up an incredibly small piece of an unknown vegetable to feel its true taste. Having put it on his tongue, the hero was very worried, because he did not know what consequences could happen to him. What he felt really horrified him, because the taste was completely different from what he expected. Instantly the guy began to take water in order to drink a little and kill that same taste. Feeling very disgusted, Tin continued to drink water as if he had not drunk it for several days. It turned out that this vegetable was indeed very spicy, and this kind of spiciness caused severe muscle spasms. In fact, it was real Sichuan pepper, which the hero tried, and did not even know that it would be so hot. The taste was really great, just like home, only 1,000 times hotter, the guy exclaimed. Now that he had tasted all the vaccinations, he realized that this job was truly done perfectly. The goddess was also very happy that the spirit had studied all the books, and he was really good. Joyful Spirit thanks everyone for their support, because only thanks to them he was able to achieve such success, and will continue in the same spirit. Then the boy suggested that the next 100 species would be a completely easy task for the spirit. This clearly upset Little Pa, because he expected that he would be able to rest at least a little. Indignant, the spirit literally began to scream, because this was ungrateful behavior. Hundreds of species are too much, and it is very difficult. Pa had to spend a lot of time in Taya space, and for this he read hundreds of books over 30 years, such as botany, gardening, soil science. He even entered the bio faculty at the institute, and it was really very difficult. The upset spirit began to complain to the goddess. They say that hundreds of species are too much, and Tin wants to kill him. Josie, flexing her fists, ordered him to do whatever Ting tells him, otherwise they will start studying the new program more, and she doesn't see anything wrong with him reading a lot. In any case, the spirit was really well praised, because he really was a great guy. After all, his work is very important for the Tao house. With his achievements they will definitely surpass all generations of dragon chefs. This is what the hero could personally promise. The guy also planned to give part of their income to the spirit to pay him for his huge contribution, but if he doesn't want to do this, then so be it. The goddess also exclaimed that she thought that in the immortal world there would be plenty of beings who would be willing to do this work, and even for an excellent pay. After thinking for a while, the spirit asked to be allowed to ask something. Namely, he wanted to know how much money he would make in a year. Judging by the sales of heavenly chicken and pure soul crayfish, with new spices, he will have no problem developing new dishes, in which case it will be easy to increase sales by 1,000 times, from which Josie will of course get the largest share, the hero the second, and spirit third. In this case, the payment should have been at least 100,000 crystals per year according to his calculations. These words really inspired the protagonist's comrades, because they could not believe his words. In their eyes, the embarrassed guy thought that this money would not be enough for them, because in the future they will expand all these restaurants, and will hold corporate events, weddings and funerals. They will need a lot of space, and that's not all. Feeling strongly motivated, Josie exclaimed that it was necessary to implement all this as soon as possible. The spirit was also excited, laughing evilly as he expected to earn a lot of money. This behavior really shocked Ting, because he could not even imagine that his friends would behave like this. Joyful Josie could not believe that she would receive so much money, and rushed into the arms of the main character to find out if it was really true. The guy immediately replied that his calculations were probably not so accurate, so you need to see for yourself. Blushing, the spirit also turned to the main character and wanted to tell him something. Namely, no matter what he tells him, he will do whatever Ting wishes. He literally swore to Mr. Mo that he would not leave Tai space until he had cultivated every plant he spoke of, and he could stop worrying and leave it to spirit because he would achieve the rank of master or professor if necessary. I wanted to plant thousands of herbs in the garden, no, all the plants of the mortal world, as well as the world of immortals, the world of ghosts, and the world of demons. In anticipation, the spirit wanted to become the master of the three worlds, and the gardening master of the entire universe. Suddenly, a portal began to form in the sky nearby. A bright beam appeared from the portal and fell directly on Tao's house. A magical glow was visible in every room of the house in which the main character was located along with his friends. Josie immediately realized that the goddess Siwanmu was about to arrive. The jade pond was in bloom. The dragon cook, the master of the house of Tao, was invited to prepare the Baihud feast. The best cooking team in the world headed to the jade pond. The smart boy was already looking forward to the fact that the peach of immortality would soon become his. Some time later, events continued to occur in the royal garden. The team climbed an incredibly huge mountain, where every step was very difficult. The stairs up the mountain were indeed very impressive, and the world itself was amazing and impressive with its beauty. Turning around, the hero noticed that there was a jade pond nearby. And it was really so. A beautiful pond was located on a levitating island. From afar a huge flower could be seen that had bloomed. Arriving at the pond, it was necessary to report to the goddess Sivanmu that the dragon's cook was already here. Feeling great joy, the guy exclaimed that when he first found himself in Tao's house, he thought that there was no more wonderful place in this world, but this exceeded all his expectations. Hitting the main character directly in the forehead, Josie explained that there is no need to compare the Jade Pond and Tao's house. Empress Siwanmu is the wife of the Jade Emperor. Of course, all their possessions will be many times more beautiful than their restaurant. But the spirit began to argue with this, because Josie herself had been roaming around the human world for centuries. The girl really didn't like the fact that Pa started arguing with her, and she grabbed him right by the head. The impudent spirit got what he deserved, and the hero wondered where the peach tree was. The question was really stupid, and the girl answered that such trees would not grow here at every step. The peach garden is a small, but maximally protected space. Even immortals have no right to enter there without the permission of the Empress. The guy didn't see anything special in this, and thought that the monkey had already managed to steal a couple of peaches. It was about a Chinese myth, which is described in the novel Journey to the West. Sun Wukong is the Monkey King, and he hired himself into the service of the Jade Emperor, who said he is guarded by the peach garden of the goddess Sivanmu. On the eve of the feast that the goddess arranged for other deities and immortals, Sun Wukong ate all the peaches in the garden, and then tricked himself into the heavenly palace and drank the elixir of immortality prepared for the celestials. The main character knew this whole story, and understood that in the human world there is such a legend as Sun Wukong caused a stir in the Siwanmu garden. The goddess immediately decided to cover the mouth of the arrogant man, because he spoke too much. The smart girl knew that if he uttered this name, even by accident, he would be killed on the spot. This guy is good, he has an excellent voice and hearing, amazing eyesight, courage worthy of heaven and earth. He was even in Tao's house, but it is in this place that whoever remembers the past will come to an end. Some time later, events continued to occur somewhere in China. In the cave, two monkeys were carrying a divine peach to someone, which was like an offering. It was really very difficult for the little monkeys to carry the huge fruit. It turned out that this offering was intended for Sun Wukong, who saw a huge peach. The deity immediately took the fruit to look at it. Instantly the Monkey King began to eat the fruit that his subjects brought to him. The worried monkeys waited for their king's reaction to see if he liked the fruit, but unfortunately, Sun Wukong shouted that this peach is not like that, and it is not suitable. The fact that it was not the same peach made him very angry, because this fruit did not look like the same peach from the heavenly kingdom. He has been eating only fruits for 1,000 years, as if he was trying just for this, because it is simply terrible. After his atrocities, Sun Wukong was taken to the heavenly palace, where he tried to break free, but was captured, and was driven to earth and crushed by a mountain, and this act was committed by no one else, as if the upset Sun Wukong really missed the kitchen of the human world, and asked to bring the two deaths here so that they could at least prepare something for him. But taking mortals into the immortal meter was a crime, and even those cooks are not able to cope with their ingredients, and earthly food in large quantities can take a lot of energy, despite the incredible taste. The Monkey King couldn't stand it because he had been eating fruit all his life, but now he has become immortal and still continues to eat it. It turned out that the other day, the servant heard good news that he wanted to report. The elderly man said that Tao's house had reopened, and Sun Wukong remembered that he had indeed not been there since the last opening. The man also said that their sales are indeed going very well. Laughing, the Monkey King knew that this news was really great. The last time he was there, it was not as tasty, but it was definitely better than those terrible fruits. Because of this, he decided that he definitely had to get there, and in this case it was necessary to see where the owners were. A few seconds later, the Monkey King was already running away from his cave, and instantly he appeared on one of the trees. Even though the gentleman had not come out for a long time, he still needed to be very careful, because it was unknown how the world had changed in his absence. Using his magical abilities, Sun Wukong literally began to scan the space to discover where the mistress of the Tao house was. After looking at the environment, the Monkey King discovered that they were somehow in a jade pond. Sun Wukong also discovered that for some reason the new dragon chef is some boy. Smiling, the Monkey King realized that he had not eaten the peaches of immortality for many years. The old man behind asked the gentleman why don't they place an order for home delivery, but the answer was not heard, and the king, not wanting to listen to the old man, continued his movement. Some time later, events continued to occur in the jade pond. Coming closer, the company of a friend discovered several girls guarding the pond. The tired hero was very glad that they finally got up. Josie began to chat with the girls nearby, telling them that they were representatives of the Tao house, and they were invited to hold a banquet in the jade pond for the empress. The two girls looked at each other, and didn't even know what to answer. The atmosphere was very heavy, and Tin noticed it immediately, because they weren't even greeted. Suddenly, someone's silhouette began to be seen nearby, and the stranger asked if this boy was really the dragon's new cook. The goddess exclaimed that this was indeed so, and answered the lady that his name was Tin. It turned out that it was Savanmu who wanted to find out how old this young man was. A little embarrassed, the boy replied that he was only 16 years old. He was indeed very young, but also very talented, and the goddess was sure that Savanmu would be impressed by his abilities. Unexpectedly, the goddess again repeated the age of the main character, after which, she exclaimed that the dragon's cook was still too young, and he should go back. This statement really shocked Tin, because they had come a very long way to get here. Savanmu admitted that there are geniuses in this world, but perfecting any skill takes time. This banquet is held very rarely, its ingredients blooming only once every century, and Savanmu was not sure that they would not waste these treasures in vain. These words really made the hero very angry, and he wanted to answer the goddess. With all her might, Josie tried to protect the dragon chef, telling Lady Ziwanmu that Mo Ting was a dragon chef who had been approved by the sharpest knife himself, and he would truly not disappoint her. In the jade pond, nymphs take care of the Baihoa, and although they were not able to taste the fruits of their labors for a long time, they did not stop trying. If they disrespect this treasure, it will be very sad. Turning to dear Josie, Ziwanmu explained that she might seem cruel, but she couldn't trust the dragon about this. Again she asked them to return so as not to force her to repeat what she had said earlier. Continuing to be indignant, the girl wanted to challenge this decision and tried to say something, but instantly the main character decided to stop her and grabbed her hand. After all, in fact, the Empress has already voiced her decision, and there is no point in arguing here. Smiling and winking at the girl, Tin asked to leave with him. Some time later, they had already begun to descend from the Jade Pond, and Josie wanted to ask Ting if he really thought there was a way to make Lady Suwanma change her mind. In fact, the guy understood that her opinion was a complete relic of the past. She simply could not normally perceive the new generation, because of which there was no point in humiliating herself. In any case, they really wanted to get that same peach. The hero realized that they wouldn't do anything to her anyway, not in this life, but someday he would make her change her mind. He will force him in such a way that Savanmu will literally beg him. Josie understood that this was really unlikely, and there was no harm in dreaming, because it was difficult to somehow force the Empress to beg an ordinary dragon cook. Now they have already left the territory of the Jade Pond, so the Empress should not care what they are doing here now. The alarmed goddess wanted to ask the dragon cook what he was up to. The smart guy really had a plan, and he asked the spirit to move the kitchen here from the old Taoed house. Using his magical abilities, Po was able to move the old kitchen with ease. Now there was a stall in this place, and Josie was very angry about this, because she did not understand who would buy something here in such a wilderness. Tin asked not to worry about this, and it was better to answer the question. Then he asked how the goddess thinks what mortal girls like to eat most of all. After thinking for a while, Josie couldn't give an answer, because everything on earth was really very tasty, and she didn't know. Turning around, the smart guy revealed the secret to this matter, and it was the snacks. A few seconds later, the goddess also remembered that she also really liked the snacks while she was on Earth. Girls can refuse the main course, but not the appetizer. Besides, the gods have been eating tasteless rubbish for several decades. And so that Savanmu understands this power of cooking, which has been smoked for thousands of years, so that she does not deprive her servants of delicious food. After all, Ting clearly understood that he deserved the title of Dragon Chef, and must prove it to Empress Suwanmu. Some time later, events continued to occur in one of the divine towns. Namely, in the building where the Empress ate her tasteless food, a little girl nearby was peeking over the wall to make sure no one had noticed her. Sneaking up, she watched the guards and expected to be unnoticed. Suddenly, one of the guards turned around and noticed a little girl. The guard exclaimed that the girl should stand and not run away. The worried girl started hiding something behind her and said she didn't do anything wrong. The embittered guardians came closer and wanted to find out what the baby was hiding behind. The alarmed girl understood that she could be punished for hiding. It turned out that she was hiding a small bag from Tao's house. These were just snacks that came in a small bag. The package actually smelled very pleasant, and everyone in the room began to smell this smell. The guards, who noticed the little girl, really liked this divine smell. The guard was offended by this, because the bodies of nymphs were created for trees and flowers. They should not be stained with traces of evil and greed, and her snacks smell strange. The smell is unclean. Having taken out one snack, the little girl wanted to show it off. After putting it in her mouth, the girl slowly began to chew the snack that she had recently bought from Tao's house. The joyful cutie said that she bought these snacks from the dragon cook, called by the three worlds. How can he be evil? Everything in their house is hygienic, she convinced. After all, they still serve in this building for many years, and do their job properly every day. The guards really understood that this was true, and did not even argue with the little girl. In any case, the little girl couldn't even count, but she just knew it. That every day is a job that is very difficult for them. And for many years the little girl was really very unhappy because of this work. But today, when she tried these snacks, she felt very happy, and finally tasted normal food, which felt like real happiness. It was also known that Dr. Chen exchanged the wind lily for something very unusual, although this flower grew once every 500 years, and the guards wanted to find out from the girl what she gave in this exchange. Then she exclaimed that she gave the most precious treasure of Empress Suwanmu, namely the golden essence of the sun. The concerned guardians were simply in shock, because they understood that this was the most valuable fire attribute of the three worlds. And this delicacy cost only 3 bags of the most valuable fire attribute of the 3 worlds. Angered even more, the nymphs knew that this system was completely dishonest, and Savanmu must find out about such an exchange as soon as possible. Meanwhile, events continued to occur near the small shop of Tao's house. All visitors were very impressed with the incredibly tasty dishes and wanted to try each of them. The dragon's cook, meanwhile, shouted at the visitors to respect the queues and not to rush, because absolutely everyone would get something. A very large number of orders awaited the Tao house, and the hero really foresaw this. Although Tin did not have time, he still tried very hard, which was visible to absolutely all visitors. Some of the girls were incredibly beautiful and literally begged to be served as quickly as possible. Each visitor could not get enough of such delicious dishes and asked for more. Very beautiful girls literally surrounded the main character, which embarrassed him extremely. Suddenly, someone decided to interrupt all the girls. Josie reassured them, saying that everything had already been sold. This is all that they, the nymphs, are capable of, and it was boring, so next time they need to hurry up in order to have time to buy the most delicious food. The concerned guy asked the goddess to be more polite because they were regular customers. But the girl did not like the behavior of the nymphs very much, and she ordered them to leave the dragon cook. The frightened nymphs began to run away in fear, and did not understand why Josie was behaving this way. Seeing off regular visitors, Tin asked them to take care of themselves and come back to their shop. The business was indeed booming, but the hero still did not understand why the goddess was so angry. The smart spirit immediately realized that Josie was angry this time for a reason. Suddenly, the hero exclaimed that he really understood, and began to think that Josie must be angry because she didn't eat much today. This was a really wrong assumption, which is why the guy got punched in the face. At the same time, someone was watching everything that was happening while sitting on a tree. It turned out that it was Sun Wukong, who was very impressed with this dragon chef. He was really cool. This guy is going to beat the soul out of the Jade Pond. He doesn't look that old, but it's unknown how he knows so much about the preferences of nymphs. Suddenly, the Monkey King heard someone nearby eating and grunting very loudly. In fact, there was a huge pig in the tree behind, who was also eating delicious snacks. The pig was very happy with such goodies, and told his brother that it was really very tasty. This made Sun Wukong very angry, because he called the pig to express his assumptions, but she kept eating and eating. After all, does the pig really think that Savanmu, the most sensible woman in the 3 worlds, will deal with this trifle? This was indeed the case, and the pig assumed that the little brother wanted to help this boy. Laughing, the Monkey King exclaimed that this was indeed so, but at the same time, the pig wanted to know if Sun Wukong was afraid that he would get into trouble. The only thing in which this world is not ideal is in culinary talents. This boy is so good at managing nymphs, with his help. In anticipation, Sun Wukong decided to ask the pig whether she thought the chef would treat the dragon to them. Suddenly, it dawned on the little pig and she realized something. Namely, that they will have the opportunity to eat very well, and not even pay for it. This thought really made Pig very happy, and she understood that it was necessary to help in this situation. Meanwhile, the hero and his comrades were resting, and they realized that the nymphs were crazy women, as well as insatiable ones. In their world, girls also love to eat, but here it somehow manifests itself on a large scale, the hero exclaimed. Savanmu agreed with this, which is why the mortal world suits her better. The enterprising girl also decided to find out how much they earned today. Looking into the box, the spirit realized that things were really bad for them. His expression suddenly changed and he exclaimed that things were literally going badly. Not understanding anything, the comrades immediately turned around to see what was the matter. The spirit literally cried because it was Ting's fault. They were just selling snacks from the garden of Tao's house, and they were paying with such valuable things. The indignant goddess did not understand what the spirit was talking about, because they did not force them to pay. Come closer, the comrades also decided to look into the box to see how much they had earned. They have about half of the treasures of the Jade Pond in their possession, and the spirit also saw how some fairies were selling their clothes. This was truly an open robbery, and Po wanted to say that although the Empress is very prudent and careful, if their property acquired by backbreaking labor over tens of thousands of years were confiscated in one day, then it is unknown what they would have done. For the comrades, this was indeed a very terrible discovery, and they understood that it was better to close this shop and need to run away from here. Suddenly, at that very second, a purple portal appeared from the sky. A bright light began to fall right next to the group of friends, which very frightened them. Instantly, several unknown silhouettes appeared nearby, and they were probably in an extremely negative mood. It turned out that they were nymphs who exclaimed that Empress Iwanmu had invited 3 representatives of the Taotai house to visit the Jade Pond right now. Laughing, the guy said that this was really good news. But Josie and Pa did not share his positive attitude, and were very scared. Ting was extremely positive and asked his friends if they thought the Empress would reward them for what they had done.